Chapter 491. There were some things that could only be done as quickly as possible. In this way, whether or not the Han people in Jiaoji could survive, and how many of them could survive, would be directly related to the issue of ruling over this place. After convincing these officers, they would go and convince the platoon officers, and the entire army would become stable again. At noon on the second day, a group of 200 people arrived at the west side of Beidai City. Ruan Chuncheng arrived at Beidai City 4 hours earlier than planned, and it was enough to show their sincerity and anxiousness. They were afraid that the mercenaries would attack the other cities again, so they rushed over without stopping to rest. When Ruan Chuncheng arrived at the city, according to the plan, 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pa and Political Commissar Kong Jie went out to welcome them and led them into Beidai City. Trying his best to maintain a smile, Ruan Chuncheng greeted Luo Pa and Kong Jie before asking about Yang Chendong. "May I know where the Duke of Loyalty is?" This time, this prime minister is under the orders of the crown prince to bring some gifts. The Duke of Loyalty is still inspecting the army. If Prime Minister Ruan is anxious, why don't you take a look with us? Political Commissar Kong Jie first smiled at Luo Pa, then turned to Ruan Chuncheng and said in an unhurried tone, all of this was planned. Ruan Chuncheng was anxious to see Yang Chendong and test his intentions, so he wanted to use this opportunity to give him a good beating and let him see the morale and momentum of the mercenaries. When he heard that Yang Chendong was inspecting the army, a bitter expression flashed across Ruan Chuncheng's face. To be able to become the prime minister, which one of them was an idiot? How could he not understand the meaning behind this? This was clearly a show of strength, but when he thought about it, he also wanted to use this opportunity to see the strength of the mercenaries. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Ruan Chuncheng agreed. Then I will have to trouble the two generals. Under Luo Pa and Kong Jie's lead, they arrived at the northernmost part of the city. This was originally a trading market, but now was occupied by the mercenaries as a temporary military camp. When they saw the temporary wooden fences from afar, they heard a neat battle cry. As the prime minister of the Jiaoji nation, Ruan Chuncheng had seen all kinds of situations. He had even entered the military camp of Jiaoji countless times. However, this was the first time he had heard such a unified voice. He hadn't even seen anyone yet, but just from these deafening voices, he knew how high the morale of the mercenaries was. Ruan Chuncheng's face changed slightly, which was noticed by Political Commissar Kong Jie, who was observing him from the side. Then he made a gesture of invitation with a smile. "Prime Minister Ruan, don't you want to see the Duke of Loyalty? He's inside, please." "All right, please, let's go together." Ruan Chuncheng forcefully suppressed the fear in his heart and said with a forced smile. There was an entire platoon of Lung Feng on duty at the entrance of the barracks. Although it seemed that there was no problem with the security of Beidai City, this place had just been recovered, so it was necessary to be vigilant. The platoon leader in charge of the guards at the entrance was Lu Jian. He was from Mount Qishan of Ryukyu Island. A while ago, he was caught by the Imperial Guards at the Songru shop in Gaozhou Prefecture of the Southern Ming Dynasty. After passing the test, he didn't say a word about the mercenaries. A while ago, he made a military contribution in the defense of Beidai City and was promoted from an auxiliary platoon leader to a platoon leader of Lung Feng. This time, he was in charge of leading the platoon. When he saw the regiment commander and political commissar walking over with a group of people dressed in Jiaoji attire, he raised his right hand with a wooden expression and said loudly, "Any outsiders who want to enter the barracks are not allowed to carry weapons. Please remove your weapons." Ruan Chuncheng's face turned ugly when he heard Lu Jian's words. If the mercenaries wanted to deal with him, it should be very easy. However, at least they had weapons on them, so they still had a trace of resistance. But if even their weapons were confiscated, then wouldn't they become fish on the chopping board? Wouldn't they be at the mercy of others? Ruan Chuncheng didn't agree immediately. The guards beside him stepped forward and pulled out their swords, shouting, "Who dares to confiscate our weapons? We are here to negotiate as representatives of the Jiaoji army, not prisoners of a defeated army." "HM, Lu Jian narrowed his eyes and turned around to look at the row of Lung Feng's soldiers behind him. The Lung Feng soldiers laughed out loud. Since he dared to use his saber in front of them, it just so happened that they hadn't fought for 2 days. It was a good opportunity to warm up. Seeing that Ruan Chunsheng had unsheathed his saber, his opponents in military green camouflage uniforms laughed instead of getting angry. Ruan Chunsheng's bodyguards' expressions turned ugly. This mission wasn't easy. If they didn't handle it well, they would be in danger of dying. Everyone was already mentally prepared for this. However, if they could avoid death, it would be best if they didn't die. But now that the situation had come to this, they didn't know what to do for a moment. They could only look at Ruan Chunsheng with troubled gazes and wait for the Prime Minister to speak. Ruan Chunsheng's expression didn't look any better. Although he was a little angry at the arrogance of the mercenaries, who wanted to confiscate his weapons as soon as they met, he was here to negotiate, not to surrender. However, he hated his guards even more. How could they pull out their swords without an order? If they angered the mercenaries, not only would they fail the negotiation, but they would also lose their lives here. Death. Of course, Ruan Chunsheng was afraid. However, he was also afraid that he wouldn't be able to complete the mission given to him by the Crown Prince. Therefore, when he saw the inquisitive looks from the guards, he turned to Luo Pe and Kong Jie and said, "Generals, we are guests after all. A host should treat his guests well." Seeing how thick-skinned Ruan Chunsheng was, Political Commissar Kong Jie spoke up before Luo Pe could say anything. "Apologies, we didn't invite you here. Even if you're a guest, you have to follow the host's rules." The moment he finished speaking, Ruan Chunsheng's expression turned ugly. This time, they were the ones who initiated the negotiation. In other words, they were the weaker party. It was difficult for them to be treated with respect. Without looking at Ruan Chunsheng's expression, Kong Jie's eyes fell on Lu Jian. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning was very clear. He wanted Lu Jian to do whatever he wanted, regardless of the fact that they were here. Lu Jian was a smart person to be able to become the platoon leader of the Cold Vanguard platoon. Seeing that the regiment commander and the political commissar had nothing else to say, he chuckled with a sinister look on his face. He raised his right hand and said to the 30 soldiers behind him, "Brothers, someone dares to show off his weapon in front of us, Cold Edge. What do you think we should do? What else can we do? Teach him a lesson." The 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members were already itching for a fight. Now that they received their platoon leader's order, they knew what to do. Each of them smiled as they took out shiny bayonets from their waists and equipped them with a 95-style spearhead. Not using bullets was already a form of respect for the Jiaoji guards. Otherwise, the battle would have ended before the fight even started. The 30 soldiers equipped with a 95-style spearhead smiled as they surrounded Ruan Chunsheng. However, even though they were smiling, their formation wasn't messed up at all. Instead, they formed a ring-shaped formation. In just a few breaths, more than 30 of Ruan Chunsheng's guards were tightly surrounded. Seeing that the enemy was approaching, the guards gripped their bayonets tightly. Then, the captain of the guards asked Ruan Chunsheng for instructions. "Since you are all young and are part of the military, a proper spar can improve everyone's relationship. However, you must remember that your subordinates must know their limits. There must be no deaths." Ruan Chunsheng could see that this battle was inevitable. However, he didn't want anyone to die. Otherwise, the negotiation would fail. That was why he reminded the captain of the guards. Speaking of which, as the Prime Minister of Jiaoji, Ruan Chunsheng's guards were naturally skilled. In a one-on-one battle with cold weapons, he couldn't think of any possibility of failure. After Ruan Chunsheng gave the order, the captain of the guards nodded immediately. Then, he said to the guards beside him, "Master said that no one can die. You must act appropriately." "All right." All the guards nodded in unison. However, compared to the Cold Vanguard platoon members who were orderly and gave the same command, these people's answers were more scattered. Seeing that the Jiaoji guards were ready, Lu Jian also pulled out the bayonet from his waist and inserted it into the 95-style spearhead. Then, he said, "Team up with 3 people. Kill." When the word "kill" was uttered, the 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members' expressions changed. If it was said that there was still a hint of playfulness in their eyes just a moment ago, now all of them were much more focused. This was also due to Yang Qindong's usual teachings. In his words, mercy to the enemy was cruelty to the reader. Therefore, no matter what the situation was, as long as they fought, no matter how strong or weak the opponent was, they had to give it their all. This was the only way to ensure that they could unleash their full strength and not fail miserably. Under such teachings, the 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members' expressions turned serious when the word kill was uttered. It could be seen that they were in teams of 3 and quickly gathered together to form a team. They had undergone this training countless times. They were so familiar with it that the Jiaoji guards only saw a blur in front of their eyes. Suddenly, there were 3 enemies in front of them. Moreover, the 3 of them were back to back. After a rough look, it seemed like there were no openings for them to attack from. No matter which direction they attacked from, they would have to face the combined attacks of the 3 people. Chapter 492. This was the first time the guards saw this 3-3 formation, and they were at a loss of what to do. However, even though they were at a loss, it didn't mean that the Cold Vanguards would wait for an opportunity. Seeing their opponents' confused expressions, the 10 groups of Cold Vanguards launched their own fierce attacks. The dazzling white bayonets were everywhere. In just the blink of an eye, at least a dozen guards had been pierced by the bayonets and fell to the ground with a look of helplessness on their faces. Lu Jian also faced Yuan Chunqing's guard captain with his bayonet. The only difference was that they were fighting one-on-one. The guard captain held a large machete in his hand. He was also tall and burly. In comparison, Lu Jian, who was only 1.78 meters tall, was at least half a head shorter than the guard captain. In terms of size, Lu Jian seemed to be at a disadvantage. This gave the guard captain a natural advantage, and he thought that Lu Jian couldn't withstand a single blow. However, just as this kind of underestimation was formed, a bayonet suddenly pierced towards his face. The guard captain's expression changed drastically. This kind of fierce attack made him lose focus for a moment, and then he instinctively raised his machete to block. Clang! Under the short exchange of weapons, the bayonet and machete clashed for a moment. Then, the bayonet that was knocked to the right suddenly turned around and stabbed towards the guard captain's waist. This move was so fast that it didn't seem to be a helpless move at all. It gave people the feeling that it was long prepared. To be able to become Yuan Chunqing's trusted guard captain, his skills were naturally extraordinary. In order to obtain this position, he had competed for a long time and defeated many opponents. Therefore, even though the dagger was as fast as lightning, the captain still managed to dodge it at the last moment with a twist of his waist. This made Yuan Chunqing, who was watching everything from the side, sigh in relief. Just as he thought that Lu Jian's attack was over, and it should be his guard captain's turn to counterattack, the bayonet suddenly turned around and left a bright red wound on the guard captain's waist. Hiss! After the sharp bayonet cut through his waist, the guard captain felt a burst of pain. His face couldn't help but twist and become a little terrifying. He had calculated everything, but he had never considered the uniqueness of the bayonet. It wasn't like a spear that could only stab. It wasn't like a saber that could only slash. It wasn't like a sword that could only stab. It wasn't like a sword that could only stab and slash. On the contrary, this bayonet could be used to stab, chop, whip, chop, and flick. It could be used to its fullest potential and could form an extremely effective killing force. As such, when faced with such a weapon, if one were to view it as an ordinary weapon, it was inevitable that one would suffer a loss. Just like this time, the whipping stance left a bloody wound on his waist. As blood continued to drip from the wound, the guard captain felt that his reflexes and strength were gradually losing. The 30 or so guard were in the same situation as the head of the guards, or perhaps even worse. In front of the 3-3 battle formation, in front of the seemingly omnipotent bayonet, none of the guards could withstand a single blow from them. Often, the guard with some skills could block one bayonet attack, but the next bayonet would fly over, making it impossible to guard against and impossible to dodge. The moment Lu Jian injured the captain of the guards, the battle on this side had already ended. None of the 30 or so guards could stand. All of them were lying on the ground with injuries all over their bodies. This was because the Lung Feng soldiers didn't intend to kill and intentionally held back. If this was a real battlefield, it wouldn't be just 30 or so injured that were lying on the ground, but 30 or so corpses. Enough! Ruan Chuanqing's expression turned extremely ugly when he saw that the guards he was so proud of were all defeated in such a short period of time. He was afraid that more of his men would be injured or killed if this went on. Thus, he roared loudly. When the country's prime minister put on a stern face, he naturally had an intimidating aura. Unfortunately, this aura was nothing in the eyes of Luo Pe and Kong Jie. On the contrary, the latter said in a mocking tone, "What's wrong? Prime Minister Ruan, are you afraid? If you are, you could go back to Hanoi City now and regroup. We will see who wins and who loses on the battlefield." He was obviously trying to provoke Ruan Chuanqing. How could Ruan Chuanqing respond? Although he was a little annoyed that his guards didn't give him face, he wouldn't forget what his mission was. Next, he pretended that he didn't hear anything and said, "Generals, I'm here to see the Duke of Loyalty. Please lead the way. The Duke of Loyalty is in the barracks, but you can't bring any weapons in." Kong Jie reminded with a smile. This old man understands. This time, Ruan Chuanqing was straightforward. He reached out and took off the sword on his waist, which was used as an ornament, and handed it to a guard behind him who had just gotten up. Then he said to the head guard, "Put down your weapon and follow this old man in." Ruan Chuanqing's cooperation made Kong Jie speechless. In his heart, he sighed at Ruan Chuanqing's flexibility. He signaled Commander Luo Pe with his eyes. After seeing the other party nod in agreement, he smiled and said to Ruan Chuanqing, "Prime Minister Ruan, please." A fight broke out suddenly and ended quickly. In the end, Lung Feng won. Of course, Lung Feng had the advantage of being equipped with a bayonet, but more importantly, it was because of their cooperation. In other words, Lung Feng was Lung Feng. Even if he fought with cold weapons, one-on-one, or even one against many, he was still able to win. When they finally stepped into the barracks, they saw 5 guards every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. These guards were all Lung Feng. Their training was basically over. What they needed to improve was their killing techniques and proficiency on the battlefield. Therefore, whenever Yang Chendong had the time, he would train the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. Since they had the advantage in numbers, once they improved their battle prowess, it would be a huge boost to the overall battle prowess of the entire army. Under the guidance of Luo Pe and political commissar Kong Jie, Prime Minister Ruan Chuanqing led the head guard who had a piece of white cloth wrapped around his waist into the depths of the barracks. From afar, he saw a wide training field. There were thousands of soldiers practicing all kinds of drills. Some were practicing formation, some were practicing assassination, and some were practicing target shooting. There were also some huge logs placed there for a few people to hold together to train their strength. All in all, Ruan Chuanqing had never seen such a training method before. All of this gave him a sense of novelty. It was as if Granny Lu had entered the Grand View Garden. When he walked in front of a group of soldiers who were practicing walking under the slogan 1, 2, 1, Ruan Chuanqing was very curious. He couldn't help but ask Luo Pe and Kong Jie beside him, "Generals, why are they practicing walking?" Of course, the 2 regimental officers wouldn't tell him the various benefits of proper formation training. They only smiled and pointed at a young man who was also dressed in camouflage clothing not far away. "That's the Duke of Loyalty. Let's go over." Oh. When he heard that Yang Chendong was right in front of him, Ruan Chuanqing set aside his curiosity and strode over to where Yang Chendong was. As he walked forward, his expression constantly changed. When he felt that the smile on his face was enough, he maintained this expression and walked over to Yang Chendong. "Duke, the Prime Minister of Jiaoji is here." Kong Jie's voice rang out respectfully and spread forward. Yang Chendong, who was watching the training on the field, didn't change his expression. It was as if he didn't hear Kong Jie at all and continued doing what he was supposed to do. After Kong Jie reported again, he didn't say anything else. He believed that the sixth young master must have heard what he said, but he didn't reply. There must be a reason why Kong Jie didn't ask anymore. Ruan Chunchung, who was originally smiling, stood there awkwardly. A full quarter of an hour passed. During this time, Yang Qindong said something to a few of the officers beside him. He pointed out many problems with the soldiers' training, but he didn't say a word to them. He didn't even turn his head to look at them. This made Ruan Chunching's expression turn even uglier. If it wasn't for Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's voice in his mind, he would have probably left in a huff. Ahem. In the end, he had to fight for the opportunity himself. After adjusting his mentality, Ruan Chunchung decided to speak up himself. Although it was embarrassing enough, it was better than standing there all the time. Your Excellency, I am the Prime Minister of Jiaoji Nation, Ruan Chunchung. I am here on the orders of my Crown Prince to pay my respects. Ruan Chunching's voice wasn't soft. He shouted with chi in his dantian, so it was impossible for anyone not to hear him. In the end, Yang Qindong finally turned his head. Yang Qindong finally moved. Ruan Chunchung wanted to take this opportunity to say something, but before he could speak, the ridiculously young Duke of Jiaoji spoke first. Are you the Prime Minister of Chiha from Jiaoji? Since we are here to talk business, where is Hong Jin? I will leave this matter to you. 2 meters behind Yang Qindong stood the captive general of Jiaoji, Hong Jin. He was here to observe how the mercenaries trained under Yang Qindong's permission. According to the 6th young master's intention, Jiaoji would have its own army in the future, and the commander of this army would most likely be handed over to Hong Jin. When Hong Jin first heard this news, he was extremely excited. He originally surrendered to save his life, but now he really wanted to serve under Yang Qindong. It was as if he had the opportunity to come to the training ground. He stared at everything without blinking. He only wanted to learn the mercenaries' training methods so that he could form a strong army in the future. Chapter 493. He was still in the middle of studying when Ruan Chunching's sudden arrival attracted his attention. As a former deputy general of Jiaoji, how could he not know the Prime Minister of Jiaoji? It was just that with his previous status, he couldn't talk to him at all and could only watch from afar. Just now, Ruan Chunching's performance fell into Hong Jin's eyes. When he saw the high and mighty Prime Minister bowing to the 6th young master, he didn't know why, but he felt a burst of joy in his heart. He originally felt inferior because he was a surrendered general, but now it seemed that there was no difference between him and the Prime Minister. Just as he was thinking about this, Yang Qindong suddenly called out his name. This made him tremble, and he couldn't believe what he had just heard. While Hong Jin was still in shock, Tiger's Mane, who was beside Yang Qindong, had already handed him a piece of paper with words written on it. This is the request for the negotiation. Take a good look. This is also a chance for you to perform well. Seize it. Tiger's Mane patted Hong Jin's shoulder as he spoke. This seemingly inconspicuous action made Hong Jin very excited. Who didn't know what kind of person Tiger's Mane was? He was Yang Qindong's most trusted person. Even regimental officers like Luo Pe and Kong Jie were very respectful in front of him. It was definitely Hong Jin's honor that Tiger's Mane thought highly of him. The excited Hong Jin immediately straightened his chest and said with an incomparably firm tone, "Please rest assured, Tiger's Mane and Tiger's Mane. I will definitely handle this matter well." Hong Jin promised solemnly. Under Tiger's Mane's signal, he came in front of Ruan Chunchung and stretched out his right hand. "Prime Minister Ruan, I will be in charge of the negotiation. Please." Ruan Chunchung's original intention was to negotiate with Yang Qindong. In his opinion, this was the only way to have an equal relationship. However, Ruan Chunchung ignored him. If he insisted on staying here, who knew what would happen? Ruan Chunchung didn't want to ruin their relationship before the negotiation, so he could only sigh and agree. "Thank you, General Hong." Being addressed so politely by Ruan Baiqing, Hong Jin's face was full of joy. "Well said, Prime Minister Ruan, please." Hong Jin's face was full of confidence, but when he really looked at Yang Qindong's conditions, he couldn't help but have a headache. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect the 6th young master's demands to be so harsh. The higher-ups actually demanded that Jiaoji hand over all the cities other than Hanoi City. They also demanded that the Jiaoji army disarm themselves and hand over their weapons. How was this a negotiation? It was clearly forcing the other party to perish. He did not think that Ruan Chunxing would agree. Therefore, when the two of them walked out of the military camp and found a quiet courtyard to sit down, Hong Jin was prepared for Ruan Chunxing to get angry and leave. In fact, Ruan Chunxing was very angry when he saw Yang Qindong's demands. This was an impossible condition. Fortunately, he didn't come to negotiate, but to buy time. Therefore, he didn't leave in anger like Hong Jin expected. Instead, he said seriously that the Jiaoji nation wouldn't accept such conditions and asked them to lower their standards before negotiating. Ruan Chunxing suddenly said such nice words, and he didn't even say a word of anger. This made Hong Jin feel that it was unrealistic. The Beidai city general's residence was now Yang Qindong's resting place. After dark, Hong Jin came to the inner courtyard after being notified. He saw Yang Qindong, who had just finished his dinner and was drinking tea and resting. Greetings, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Hong Jin knelt on the ground with a plop and said sincerely. He wanted to call him the sixth young master, but he knew that with his current status, he didn't have the right to do so. You're here. How's the situation? Yang Qindong stretched out his hand and gestured for Hong Jin to get up. He also asked about the negotiations. Duke of Loyalty, I have already talked to Prime Minister Wan. He thinks that our demands are too high. He hopes that we can lower our standards, Hong Jin said honestly. Lower your standards? Yang Qindong's face flashed with an unknown smile. He's not angry. Hearing Yang Qindong's question, Hong Jin was stunned at first. Then he thought for a while and said, he's a little angry, but he doesn't show it. Ha ha ha. At this moment, Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh out loud. He had made demands and conditions that were impossible for the other party to fulfill, but the other party didn't turn hostile or get angry. He only said that the demands were too high. What did this mean? It could only mean that the other party didn't really want to surrender at all. Everything was just a stall for time. So, no matter what request Yang Qindong made, they would use all kinds of reasons to reject it. The so-called negotiations, Jiaoji wasn't sincere, and Yang Qindong was never serious. This was just a way for everyone to test each other. Through this test, Yang Qindong got the result he wanted. That was, the other party was indeed stalling for time. They should be planning something. Before they were ready, they wouldn't easily turn hostile. After understanding this, Yang Qindong knew what to do. He said to Hong Jin, who was still standing on the opposite side waiting for orders, how about this? When you talk to the other party tomorrow, just say this at the same time in a courtyard temporarily provided for Ruan Chunxing. The Prime Minister of Jiaoji had also finished his meal and was chatting with the guard captain beside him. You've seen the training ground today, right? With your experience, if we were to go against the mercenaries now, what are our chances of winning? Ruan Chunxing asked with interest. Although it was true that he was the prime minister, he didn't know much about military affairs, unlike the guard beside him, who was originally a military man. Seeing the prime minister asking so seriously, the guard captain hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. The mercenaries' morale is very high. If we were to go against them now, I'm afraid we would lose. What are our chances of winning? After Ruan Chunxing asked, he seemed to have thought of something and said, just say it boldly. There are only the two of us here. After receiving the Prime Minister's encouragement, the guard captain looked eager to give it a try. Then he slowly squeezed out 2 words. 20%? Hearing the words, Ruan Chunxing looked at the guard captain suspiciously. Being stared at, the guard captain lowered his head and squeezed out 2 words with difficulty. 10%. Only 10%. Hearing this answer, Ruan Chunxing was clearly very dissatisfied. Yes, with our current weapons and equipment, it's only 10%. However, if we can have more metal shields, perhaps we can increase it a little. If there's any way to make the mercenaries hesitate, then our chances of winning will be even higher, the guard captain answered honestly. Ruan Chunxing knew that this was the truth, but this result still made him very dissatisfied. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then, he began to think in his heart. The crown prince had already ordered people to forge metal shields and even said that he wanted to build mobile metal carriages. If that was the case, then it wasn't like they wouldn't be able to retaliate at all. Thinking about how he had already sent people to the southern Ming Empire, if they could pressure the Duke of Loyalty, then their chances of winning would increase. Sai, what we lack is time. Ruan Chunqing sighed. Whether it was forging metal shields, metal carriages, or going to the southern Ming Empire to ask for help, they all needed time. However, would the mercenaries give them enough time? How could he delay? It seems that there is a need to make some concessions on some matters. Ruan Chunqing muttered to himself. The first negotiation ended without any results. The next morning, without waiting for Hong Jin to leave, Ruan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him. It was no wonder that he couldn't keep his cool. After all, in comparison, he was under more pressure. Hong Jin was still thinking about how to complete the task given to him by the sixth young master. Now that Ruan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him, he was no longer in a hurry. He smiled and invited the prime minister, whom he once looked up to sit in his courtyard and drink tea. The initiative was already in his hands, so of course, Hong Jin wasn't in a hurry. However, Ruan Chunqing couldn't. Although he wanted to pretend to be very shrewd, the situation didn't spare him. Seeing that the two of them sat together and drank 2 pots of tea, he couldn't help but take the initiative to say, "General Hong, do you think we can continue the negotiation yesterday?" "Wait, I drank too much tea. I need to go to the toilet." Hong Jin didn't wait for Ruan Chunqing to finish his sentence. He pretended to be in a hurry to pee, apologized, and left. Seeing how arrogant Hong Jin was, the prime minister's guard said indignantly, "A petty man intoxicated by success." Of course, Ruan Chunqing heard this. He already knew about Hong Jin's background, and even knew that he was from the Hong family. In the past, even if someone introduced him, whether he wanted to meet such a small figure depended entirely on his mood. Now, he was the one putting on airs. Of course, he was angry. However, when he considered the big picture, he had to suppress his anger. Forget it. A great man knows when to yield, right? So what if he lowered his head in front of this petty man? Once Jiaoji obtained the final victory, not only Hong Jin, but also the entire Hong family, he wouldn't let them off easily. After comforting himself in his heart, Hong Jin waited for nearly an hour before returning to the courtyard with a satisfied look on his face. When he entered, he pretended to be embarrassed and said, My stomach isn't feeling well. Sorry for making you wait, Prime Minister." Chapter 494. Although his words sounded nice, he did not seem to be apologetic at all. Ruan Chunqing did not want to lower himself to his level. As long as he could stall for time and let the other party be proud of himself. So what? "General Hong, are you all right now? Can we continue with the discussion about yesterday's matter? After all, you are a citizen of Jiaoji, and the Hong family is the cornerstone of Jiaoji. For this reason, can we compromise a little?" Seeing Hong Jin sit down again, Ruan Chunqing was afraid that the other party was up to no good, so he said all these in one breath. "Compromise a little? How?" Hong Jin pretended not to understand and asked, "Let's see if we can cede a few cities to the Duke of Loyalty. As you know, yesterday's request is no different from wiping out the entire Jiaoji. I really can't agree to it." Ruan Chunqing said shamelessly. "No." Unexpectedly, Hong Jin shook his head and rejected the offer directly. "Please don't, General Hong. For the sake of the Hong family, please compromise a little. Don't worry, when I return, I will promote the people of the Hong family and make them one of the top 6 families. What do you think?" This time, in order to achieve his goal, Ruan Chunqing was really going all out. He could make any kind of promise as long as he could buy some time. As expected, when he mentioned the Hong family, especially when he said that he could make the entire Hong family one of the top 6 families, Hong Jin's eyes lit up as if he was tempted. "General Hong, you must help me." Ruan Chunqing begged for mercy again. Although he could not make the decision on important matters, if he was willing to help, he could buy some time. Perhaps it was because of Ruan Chunqing's humble attitude or the benefits of the Hong family. This time, Hong Jin did not reject immediately. Instead, He sat there and closed his eyes. After a few breaths, he suddenly opened his eyes and shook his head again. It still won't work. The Duke of Loyalty wants Jiaoji to be completely submissive. It won't work if we give you a few cities. Hearing that it still won't work, Ruan Chunqing really wanted to cry. But fortunately, Hong Jin suddenly said, "This method won't work, but there is another method that we can try." Hearing that there was still hope, Ruan Chunqing suddenly became energetic. He quickly reached out and grabbed Hong Jin's arm and asked, "Is there any other way?" Seeing how agitated Ruan Chunqing was and how hard he was grabbing his arm, a painful expression flashed across Hong Jin's face. "Hurry up and let go. You're hurting me." Oh, it's my fault. All right, General Hong. If you have any ideas, please tell us quickly." Seeing how easily Ruan Chunqing apologized and how anxious he was, Hong Jin felt that the time was right and said slowly, "I'm sure you know what the loyal Duke did after he took over Beidong City since you've been here for a day." "What did I do?" Facing this question, Ruan Chunqing was puzzled and thought hard. As expected of a prime minister, his mind worked quickly. It was unknown what he thought of, but he suddenly raised his head to look at Hong Jin and asked, "General Hong, are you referring to Duke Zhongwei's policy towards the Han and Jiaoji people?" Hearing that the topic was about to be discussed, Hong Jin couldn't help but be amazed at how smart the other party was. He nodded at this moment. "That's right. The loyal Duke is very good to his own people. This general has heard from him more than once that he is worried about the status and living conditions of the Han people in Jiaoji. If we can work on this aspect, we might be able to cater to his interests and give Jiaoji a chance to breathe." Hearing this, Ruan Chunqing's mind spun quickly. He thought that if he could really work on the Han people, wouldn't he be able to buy some time for the Crown Prince? This was the new request that Hong Jin received when he visited Yang Chendong last night. Previously, Yang Chendong was worried that the Han people would suffer losses if a war broke out. It would be great if they could save them in advance. Right at this moment, Ruan Chunqing arrived. Yang Chendong wouldn't believe that the other party wanted to negotiate or even surrender. It was already good enough that Jiaoji was under the Ming dynasty's jurisdiction. However, this wasn't the result that Yang Chendong wanted. If he wanted to raise the status of the Han people, it wasn't just about convincing the enemy. It wasn't even important to convince them. After all, who knew what would happen the next day if they were convinced today? If the current generation was convinced, what would the next generation be like? The best solution wasn't to place hope on others, but to do something with one's own abilities. For example, if Jiaoji was completely destroyed and handed over to the Han people to rule, even if there were disloyal people in the future, wouldn't it be like meat rotting in a pot? Thus, from the start, Yang Chendong had no intention of letting Jiaoji off. No matter what price the other party had to pay, it was the same. However, the reason why he agreed to negotiate was because there were some things that he needed to prepare. With the 10,000 soldiers in his hands, defeating the Jiaoji army wouldn't be a problem. The problem was that after defeating the Jiaoji army, he wouldn't have enough strength to rule this place. He didn't want to work so hard only to benefit someone else in the end. Thus, the problem of population was the problem. In order to achieve his goal of ruling this place, Yang Chendong had already sent a message to Qiqian City, asking them to gather some people and move them to Jiaoji. This would solve the problem of governance after the departure of the Lung Feng army and expand the Yang faction's influence and territory. It would take time for those people to arrive. Yang Xie's navy was about to attack Zhejiang Prefecture and other places, so it would take time as well. Thus, why not take advantage of this time to get the Han people of Jiaoji over? That way, he wouldn't have to worry about people venting their anger on them or using them to threaten him in the upcoming war. This was why he gave Hong Jin a new mission after meeting him last night. This was why Hong Jin seemed to be persuaded by Ruan Chunqing and took the initiative to give him ideas. Otherwise, with Hong Jin's status as a surrendered general, how would he dare to come up with such an idea and make such a decision? However, how would Ruan Chunqing know all of this? Furthermore, with his worldview and outlook on life, If there was a day when Jiaoji attacked the Great Ming, he would definitely not consider the lives of the Jiaoji people living in the Great Ming. It was precisely because of this different understanding that he decided to agree to Hong Jin's idea immediately after hearing it. However, he was still a little worried about whether Hong Jin's guess was right or not. What if everything was what they thought and the Duke of Zhongdong attacked them? Wouldn't that be bad? After making up his mind, Ruan Chunsheng looked at Hong Jin with a burning gaze. General Hong, are you sure that as long as we send all the Han people in the country over, the Duke of Zhongdong will sit down and negotiate with us? I'm not sure. Hong Jin shook his head honestly, but then he said, but I know that doing this can stall for time, right? And if we can stall for time, we will have time to think of a better way, right? The moment Hong Jin said that, Ruan Chunsheng's heart began to beat faster. He thought that the other party had seen through his intentions. However, when he heard the last sentence, he couldn't help but relax. Yes, doing this could indeed stall for time. Even if they couldn't think of a better idea during this time, at least this could prevent the war from happening immediately. This would give the crown prince and the messenger to the Great Ming more time to prepare. Thinking that this was originally a matter with only benefits and no harm, Ruan Chunsheng nodded and agreed. Okay, we will do, as General Hong said. I will send someone to send a letter to the crown prince and send all the Han people in the country here. However, this is a huge project. I'm afraid that it can't be done in a year or half a year. The last sentence was said by Ruan Chunsheng tentatively, because if there was really a year or half a year, the crown prince would be able to prepare. Once the iron shields and iron chariots could be manufactured, they would have a chance to fight against the mercenaries. At that time, with the advantage of the number of troops and the fact that they were fighting on their home ground, the chances of winning were not small. What? Half a year or a year? Haha, Prime Minister Ruan, don't joke around. Do you think the Duke of Zhongdong will agree? When Hong Jin heard that it would take such a long time, he couldn't help but laugh. He didn't forget that Yang Qindong set a time limit when he gave him this task last night. Ruan Chunsheng didn't really expect that it would take so long. After all, the Jiaoji country wasn't big. It wasn't like the Great Ming, where it took a long time to walk from the south to the north. When he saw that he couldn't test Hong Jin, he asked in a consulting tone, then according to General Hong, how long is it appropriate to do this thing? Hong Jin didn't speak immediately. Instead, he raised his hand and stretched out 5 fingers. 5 months? Seeing this gesture, Ruan Chunsheng instinctively said, no. Hong Jin shook his head. It's 50 days. When he said this, Ruan Chunsheng had a bad feeling in his heart. But Hong Jin still shook his head after hearing this. Then, he said in an unquestionable tone, 5 days. If it's more than that, I can't guarantee that I can convince the Duke of Zhongdong. What? 5 days? That's impossible. Ruan Chunsheng jumped up from the chair and said in an agitated tone, not to mention that he originally wanted to use this matter to delay time. Even if he really wanted to do it, it was absolutely impossible to do it in 5 days. From some places in Jiaoji to Beidai City, 5 days was far from enough. Chapter 495. As if he already knew that Ruan Chunsheng would have such a reaction, Hong Jin retracted his 5 fingers and spread out his hands. If that's the case, then there's nothing to talk about. I'll go report to the Duke of Loyalty. Maybe after lunch today, they will send troops to Hanoi City. After saying this, Hong Jin stood up and looked like he was about to leave. How could Ruan Chunsheng let Hong Jin leave like this? If that was the case, wouldn't his lobbying mission have failed? Therefore, he immediately reached out and pressed on Hong Jin's shoulder. General Hong, is there anything we can discuss? How about this? How about 3 months? 6 days. 2 months. 7 days. 1 month. 8 days. Half a month. 9 days. The two of them were like peddlers and finally set the time at 10 days. 10 days was the date Yang Qindong gave to Hong Jin, because within 10 days, Yang Qindong could basically prepare for war. In such a short time, there would definitely be some Han people who couldn't come because they lived too far away. This was something that couldn't be helped. A long night was fraught with problems. If there were a few hundred or even 1,000 Hans in one or two cities that did not arrive, Yang Shandong would definitely not allow that to happen. 10 days naturally made Yuan Chunsheng somewhat dissatisfied. But he also thought that when the time came, he would just delay a bit and try to send some people over within 10 days. After 10 days, there would be more people coming. He didn't believe that at that time, the Duke of Loyalty would really dare to start a war. With each having their own plans, the two sides reached a temporary agreement. Yuan Chunsheng wrote a letter personally and sent it to the Crown Prince in Hanoi City. After that, the war in Jiaoji obtained a temporary peace. Yunnan Ping, Shi Wang residence. The Mu family, which was the closest to Jiaoji, had been planting their own intelligence agents in Jiaoji. They were the first to know that Yang Qindong had suddenly appeared outside Chu-Yi City with his mercenaries and occupied the city. Then, he had sent his troops to Beidai City and occupied the city. After receiving the news, Mu Bin immediately sent the information to the southern Ming Emperor, Zhu Qizhen. After that, he called Wang Ji, the current Right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War, to help him analyze the current situation. Along with Wang Ji was the outstanding disciple of the Mu family. Muong was not even 30 years old, but he had been in the army for more than 10 years. This child of the Mu family, who had entered the military camp in his teens, not only had extraordinary skills, he was also abnormally brave and fierce when fighting. He became one of the young people of the Mu family that Mu Bin valued the most. The three of them were sitting in the side hall of Lord Shiping's mansion. The reason why they didn't call anyone else over was because they wanted to discuss the main point of the matter. Under such a chaotic situation, how should the Mu family make a decision? When discussing such an important matter that concerned the interests of the Mu family, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. Although Muong was still young, he was eloquent and calm in the face of trouble. It was natural to call him over. Wang Ji was even more so. As someone who had been abandoned by Emperor Ingzong, he had no choice but to rely on the Mu family. His thoughts were naturally for the sake of the Mu family. As someone who almost became the minister of the Ministry of War, he naturally had good judgment. Calling him over was a good opportunity to listen to his views on the current situation. Wang Mu Bin of Shiping was sitting between the two of them. He listened to their opinions without saying a word. The three of them knew about the news. Next, it was time to express their views. The first to speak was the young Muong. He first took the information and carefully read it 3 times. Then, he shook his head. This is not possible. Everyone knows how many people there are in the mercenaries. It was not easy for them to come out alive with more than 10,000 people. How could they fight their way to the inner part of Jiaoji and occupy 2 cities? They even forced their way to Hanoi City? Is there a mistake in the information? It was no wonder that Muong would think this way. It was because he could not do the same thing. Although he was considered a general of the Mu clan, even if he was given 100,000 soldiers, he would not be able to do things so beautifully, let alone 10,000. The information can't be fake. This information has been verified. Mu Bin saw that Wang Ji also did not believe it, so he spoke up to confirm the authenticity of the information. As for the verification he mentioned, it was naturally the same information sent by another intelligence team. For a matter, one person's words could be wrong and could not be trusted completely. However, when everyone said the same thing, there was no doubt that it was true. Originally, Wang Ji also wanted to question this matter. Now that he heard Mu Bin's words, he quickly shut his mouth. If he still doubted it at this time, it was equivalent to doubting Lord Shiping. For him, who had offended Emperor Ingzong and had nowhere to go, if he did not cling to Mu Bin's thigh, he would really become a nobody in the world. As soon as Mu Bin said this, the side hall suddenly quieted down again. Obviously, everyone needed to digest this information. Then, after waiting for about 10 minutes, seeing that the two beside him had almost recovered, Mu Bin opened his mouth again and asked, "Okay, now you can say whatever you want to say. There are only the 3 of us here, so you are not allowed to speak nonsense." The so-called nonsense meant that they could say whatever they wanted. Once they left the room, they would not say it again. No one would be punished for it. Since they could say whatever they wanted, Wang Ji's small eyes rolled for a moment before he said, "If all of this is true, then the combat strength of this mercenary group is too powerful. This loyal duke is too ambitious." "What do you mean?" Mu Bin felt that Wang Ji seemed to be implying something. Seeing that Mu Bin was interested, Wang Ji knew that the opportunity to show off had come. He did not hold back and said everything that was in his mind. "Lord Sheeping, think about it. If this is really done by the mercenary group, then how powerful is their strength? With such strength, why did it take nearly 2 months when the imperial court asked him to deal with the Huang bandits? With their tyrannical strength, they could just push forward. After a few battles, the untrained and disorderly Huang bandit army would scatter and flee in all directions. Not only that, if he really wanted to solve the emperor's problem and did his best, he could have come to quell the chaos in Yunnan after eliminating the Huang bandits. At that time, Prince Min was not powerful yet. He would have had the chance to kill them in Yunnan. Then, the current situation would not have been so complicated." In one breath, Wang Ji said a lot, which faintly revealed a fact. He had always thought that the mercenary group did not fully display their strength, but was hiding it. Then may I ask, under what circumstances should one intentionally conceal one's strength? Could it be that he was plotting something big, or even the reverse? Did he deliberately want to see something happen? Did he deliberately want to see the chaos become bigger and bigger so that he could benefit from it? After all, anyone who had an invincible army would want to have space to display their strength. Otherwise, wouldn't the jewelry be covered in dust? It had to be said that Wang Ji's deduction did make some sense. Mu Bin had also heard those words, but even though they had already thought of this point, they were still unable to see through Yang Qindong's grand goal of wiping out Jiaoji, raising the prestige of the Han people, and dominating the world. It was not because of other reasons, but because their vision was too narrow. Although they were considered to be in a high position, their eyes were always on the Ming dynasty, and they were also in this environment. Since young, they were taught that the outside world was a barbarian land, and it was incomparably desolate. The center of the world was the Ming dynasty, and those places were pitifully poor. What was the use of occupying them? It was under such conservative thinking that Mu Bin asked such a question. So, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is deliberately hiding his strength. But why is he doing this? What is the use of damaging Jiaoji? Does he really want to occupy that place? Although this prince has never been there, I have heard many people say that the land there is small, and there are many people there. It is very poor. Using Mu Bin's words, Wang Ji also said, of course, he doesn't want to occupy that place. There are no benefits there. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is doing this to show off his strength. This way, others will be wary of him, and then he can achieve his goal. Goal? What goal? This time, it was Mu Ong who asked. He. Wang Ji smiled proudly, and then asked Mu Ong, General Mu, this old man wants to ask you. After hearing about the strength of the mercenary army, if you were to lead an army to fight him, what are your chances of winning? Mu Ang's face turned red, as if he had been asked a question. He wanted to say that he was not afraid of the mercenary army, but when he thought about the way they attacked Jiaoji, it was not something he could do. This courage dissipated in a short time, and he had to shake his head and say, if the two armies really fight, and fight with swords and spears, I'm afraid our Mu family will not be able to gain any advantage. Hearing Mu Ang's answer without confidence, Wang Ji not only did not make sarcastic remarks, but also nodded. Let's see. Even the Mu family army does not have the confidence to win. Then whether it is Ying Zong or Min Wang, how can they talk about winning? This is equivalent to obtaining victory in terms of momentum before the battle. If they want to use this momentum to ask for something from the emperor, how can they not agree? At this point, Mu Bin, who was sitting at the side, finally seemed to have thought it through. Does official Wang mean that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage wants to be a king like this prince? There is indeed such a possibility. After all, we have received news before that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is very persistent about the throne. Wang Ji nodded and said seriously. Chapter 496. He also wants to be a king? Why? How can the emperor agree so easily? When Muong heard this, he didn't think much of it. The reason why the Mu family was so powerful now was because Mu Bin was conferred the title of king. However, if anyone could be conferred the title of king, then the title of king wouldn't be important and it wouldn't bring so much glory to the family. In Muang's eyes, it was better to have fewer and fewer kings in the world. This way, the king's status would be more important, and he would have more confidence when he spoke. Muong wasn't the only one who thought this way. Mu Bin also had the same idea. He opened his mouth and added, "I'm afraid it won't be so easy to be a king." Will the emperor agree so easily? Of course not. Wang Ji replied with a very certain tone. Then, as if he was afraid that the two people didn't believe him, he continued, "King, General Mu, think about it. The reason why the Mu family can be conferred the title of king is because you have guarded the southwest for the great Ming dynasty for generations. In addition, your influence is only big in this place. Even if you are conferred the title of king, the emperor won't be so afraid. However, the Duke of Loyalty is different. He is young, and his influence is not only in the southern Ming dynasty, but also in Baiming. If such a person is conferred the title of king, wouldn't it be asking for trouble? More importantly, if there's a war in the future, how will the Duke of Loyalty be rewarded for his meritorious service? Isn't the emperor above the king? Does the Duke of Loyalty have disloyal thoughts? Hearing this, Sheeping King Mu Bin's expression couldn't help but change again and again. Whether he has disloyal thoughts or not, no one knows. But once there is a slight possibility, we must be prepared. Presumably, on this point, Emperor Ingzong must have considered more than us and is more thorough. That's why this old man said it's not easy to confer the title of king. Wang Ji's understanding of Yang Qindong was limited, so he naturally didn't dare to rashly judge some things. However, based on his understanding of Zhu Qizhen, seeing that he was so wary of Yang Qindong, this inference was extremely reasonable. After saying so much, Mu Bin and Muong finally understood. The reason why Yang Qindong suppressed Jiaoji was to use this opportunity to display his military prowess and obtain benefits from Zhu Qizhen. Now, it was up to the emperor to decide. After thinking it through, Muong suddenly chuckled. Speaking of which, the loyal duke took a roundabout route for the sake of fame. In order to achieve this goal, he must have paid a heavy price to enter the Jiaoji army. Muong couldn't be blamed for saying that. He knew how strong the Jiaoji army was. Although it was still a bit worse than the Mu family's army, it was not by much. The mercenaries could win against them, but they should also be the kind that would kill 1,000 of the enemy and lose 800 of their own men. And the price he paid was nothing more than a throne, and it was very likely that he would not be able to obtain it. If that was the case, wouldn't it be equivalent to putting in effort for nothing? But no matter what, this matter had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Regardless of whether the Jiaoji army suffered heavy losses or the mercenaries were heavily injured, they were happy to see it happen. Now that the matter seemed to have been cleared up, everyone's previous worries also disappeared. This originally had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Moreover, no matter how strong the mercenaries were, it was impossible for them to find trouble with the Mu family army after defeating the Jiaoji army. Not to mention that they did not have any conflicts before. Even if they really fought with the Mu family army, what good would it do? Even if there were no benefits, who would be willing to do it? After knowing that no matter how the war developed, it had nothing to do with him, Mu Bin's expression completely relaxed. All right, just send people to keep an eye on this matter. As for how it will develop, there must be someone who has a bigger headache than us. Mu Bin's words were correct. Prince of Min's faction also had the same attitude as him, but they did not care about their own affairs. They were currently thinking of using all their strength to conquer the entire Guangdong province. This was because during this period of time, they had sent troops everywhere and conquered many cities in Guangxi that they had yet to reclaim. Now that the entire Guangxi was in their hands, they naturally set their sights on Guangdong, especially the important Guang province. The person who Mu Bin said would have a bigger headache was naturally the southern Ming imperial court. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was the first to receive the news, was in a good mood. When Yang Chendong left Gaozhou Prefecture and went straight to Liang Mountain, he also brought Guaning, Ma Wei, Yu Guang, and other generals out of Gaozhou Prefecture and took a detour to Guangzhou Prefecture. After a round of recruitment, in addition to the support of the imperial court, 10,000 southern Ming soldiers quickly gathered in the Guangzhou Prefecture and had a certain amount of military strength. However, it was also at this time that all kinds of news came from the front. Some were good, and some were bad. The so-called bad news was naturally that the Min King and the Miao army had attacked everywhere and finally conquered the entire Guangxi, allowing the Min King's forces to develop even more. There was even news that they were gathering troops. The next target would probably be the Guangzhou Prefecture that they were in. After all, as long as they conquered this place, the entire Guangdong province would not be far from falling into the enemy's hands. For this, other than continuously strengthening the city's defenses and recruiting troops, Kuang Yi continuously sent urgent documents to the capital and Nanjing to request for more support from the imperial court. Other than the bad news, there was also good news. For example, he just received the news that the Duke of Loyalty had brought his mercenaries and killed his way into Jiaoji. Not only did they pass through the complicated terrain of the Liang Mountain rainforest, but they also took over Jiaoji's Sui City and Beiti City. The Southern Ming spy in Jiaoji said that the current Jiaoji could not even take care of itself. When this news entered Kuang Ye's hands, he was so happy that he almost jumped up. Now that Jiaoji was entangled, he would not be able to think about sending troops out of Southern Ming. Didn't this mean that they had one less opponent? Kuang Yi was not only old, but his thinking was also very old. In his opinion, the Min King was surnamed Zhu and had the bloodline of Emperor Taizu. The battle with the emperor was an internal battle of the Zhu family. No matter what, the world still belonged to the Zhu family. They could not let an outsider take advantage of it. Good. The Duke of Loyalty is indeed powerful. The mercenaries did not disappoint. With the news that had just arrived, Kuang Yi, who had not smiled for a long time, drank 3 large cups of wine in his temporary residence. He even called his student, Guaning, over to drink with him. Guaning did not understand why Kuang Yi was so happy. Seeing that the drinking stopped, he asked carefully, "Teacher, this is the victory of the Duke of Loyalty. Why are you so happy? Why can't I be happy?" Kuang Yi, who was in a good mood, decided to teach his student well. He asked, "Tell me, if the mercenaries led by the Duke of Loyalty fought with the tyrannical Jiaoji army, who would win in the end?" Guaning shook his head. The strength of the mercenaries is indeed tyrannical, especially the continuous fire guns in their hands. No matter who is their enemy, they won't be able to gain any advantages. But in the end, their military strength is too little. They can still win some battles, but to say that they can really wipe out the entire Jiaoji army is unrealistic. That's right. Kuang Yi nodded with satisfaction and said, "According to what you said, the mercenaries will fight with the Jiaoji army until both sides suffer losses. If this is the result, it will only be good for the great Ming dynasty." At this moment, Guaning finally understood. Then he said tentatively, "Teacher, you mean that this is a battle between 2 tigers. There will be casualties. Even the one who wins won't get any benefits, right?" "That's right." Kuang Yi stroked his beard and said, "Actually, I admire the Duke of Loyalty very much. A hero like him probably wouldn't appear even in a few hundred years. Even Emperor Taizu was not as good as him when he was at his age. If such a person was born in a chaotic world, he would be able to create a new country. It's a pity that he was born in the wrong time. Although our great Ming dynasty is also experiencing war, our foundation is still good. Most of the people have clothes to wear, food to eat, and can live and work in peace and contentment. In such an environment, it is obviously impossible to have any great construction skills." Guaning, who was at the side, kept nodding. He agreed with his teacher's analysis. Kuang Yi didn't seem to have finished and continued. "This old man admires the Duke of Loyalty and courage, but I also fear him. This is because young people are sometimes impulsive and do not act according to common sense. I am worried that he will have other thoughts because he has the power weapon. That is why I advise the emperor to use him while also being on guard against him. Yes, yes, we must be on guard against such people. Guaning agreed. After all, it was not the first time that one's merits overshadowed his master's. History has proven that once an official's merits were too great, there would be many rebellions. That is why I am so happy to hear this news. Just as you said, although the mercenary army is powerful, there are too few of them and their foundation is too weak. It is not possible for them to do anything to Jiaoji. The best outcome would be for both sides to suffer great losses. In that case, they would also suffer great losses. Without using a single soldier, the imperial court was able to make the two people whom they were wary of fight to the point where it was difficult to tell who would win. Moreover, they were both in a state of serious injury. Was this not good? Isn't this worthy of a celebration? Kuan Yi finally spoke clearly. When Guaning heard this, he could not help but nod. Teacher's analysis is very correct. This student will learn. Chapter 497. Ha ha, Guaning. You are actually very smart. Do your job well. Teacher is getting old and will retire one day. When that time comes, the Ministry of War will be under your control. Kuan Yi was so happy that he couldn't help but say what was on his mind. Guaning, who was still listening to his teacher's teachings, became excited when he heard this. This was the first time his teacher talked to him about his future. In the past, he thought that Kuan Yi only cared about serving the country and didn't think about personal matters. Now, it seemed that it wasn't that he didn't think about it, but that he didn't want to express it. Kuan Yi was almost 70 years old. How many more years would he be in charge of the Ministry of War? When he retires, he would arrange for his trusted aides to take over. This was human nature. At that time, it would be time for him to rise to the next level. Thank you, teacher. Guaning stood up and bowed in gratitude. Ha ha! Kuan Yi's laughter sounded again. It seemed that from this moment onwards, the Southern Ming Empire had regained its former prosperity and power. The news was still being passed around and had not reached Nanjing yet. However, when the news reached there, especially after the emissary of Jiaoji met with Zhu Qizhen, it would definitely make Emperor Ingzong, who had not been doing well recently, happy. However, these people didn't know that their happiness was for nothing. Everything that was impossible in their eyes was possible in Yang Qindong's hands. They had underestimated the Duke of Loyalty. Jiaoji Country, Beatty City. 9 days had passed since Hong Jin and Ruan Chunqing agreed on the agreement. In these 9 days, more than 20,000 Han people had arrived at Beatty City. Among them, there were hundreds of Jiaoji spies who were hiding among them. They were dressed like the Han people. In addition, they had lived together for many years, so it was easy to disguise themselves. According to Ruan Chunqing, there were at least 10,000 Han people rushing here. There were also many cities that were still mobilizing because they were too far away. All in all, Ruan Chunqing was very proactive in this matter. His actions seemed to be very fast. However, Jiaoji wasn't a small country. It was impossible to complete this matter in 10 days. This way, it would be able to stall for time. Yang Qindong had long seen through Ruan Chunqing's thoughts. He didn't point it out because he also needed time to prepare for the battle. With the Han people entering the city, it would be easier for them to conceal their military objectives. As for whether or not there were spies from the Jiaoji nation among the 20,000 Han people who had already entered the city, Yang Qindong did not care. After all, these people were going to be sent to Ryukyu Island. At that time, no matter who you are, after studying and living there, you will become a resident of Crimson City. On the surface, Yu Qian was in charge of the management of Crimson City. However, he was more in charge of managing the people's livelihood and the development of various factories. In fact, he was still implementing military control among the people. If one had to describe it, it was a bit like when China was established in the 60s. Every outsider who entered would be strictly checked. Even if you were a Han person, you would be disrupted after entering the city. Yang Qindong was playing this game. Under such a policy, Lung Feng, The auxiliary soldiers, the militia, and even the children's regiment, as well as the residence committee, if anyone tried to do anything, they would be caught and dealt with. Even wearing a big hat on the streets was a common thing. It wasn't worth making a fuss about. Under such an atmosphere, no matter where these 20,000 Han people came from, they would only be on the same side when they arrived at Ryukyu Island. In fact, the moment these 20,000 people entered Beatty City, they were under military control. Then, they were escorted out of the city by Lung Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers, to Chui City. At the seaside, not far from Chui City, the Yangtze Navy ship was already waiting there. On the ship, not only were there large amounts of firearms and ammunition produced by Crimson City's arsenal, there were also 50,000 Han people. These 50,000 Han Chinese were all young and active members who had performed outstandingly on Ryukyu Island. They were selected by various units and departments. They would become the backbone of the Jiaoji country in the future. They would lead the people here to build a new Crimson City. Of course, this so-called building was not really building a modern city. Instead, it was a transfer of management and governance. In other words, it was the continuation of Yangtze's new territory. This was also an expansion from the island to the mainland. This was the first expansion, and there was no prior experience. In order to achieve a better goal, these 50,000 people were only the first batch. There would be a second and third batch, each with 50,000 people. With these 150,000 people as the foundation, and some Lung Feng soldiers stationed here in the future, stabilizing the territory of Jiaoji would not be a problem. In truth, Yang Qindong wanted to send more people out from the island. However, these 150,000 youths were already enough to cause Crimson City to suffer. After all, what Ryukyu Island lacked the most was manpower. Being able to squeeze out these 150,000 people was because Yang Qindong had given a strict order, and his subordinates had no choice but to obey. If it had been someone else who had given this order, Yu Qian and the others would have been able to provide 20,000 to 30,000 people. Now, out of the first batch of 50,000 people, other than leaving behind 2,000 people in Chui City as the backbone to start changing the living conditions there, the remaining 48,000 people were carrying all kinds of food, drinks, and ammunition towards Beidai City. There are still too few people. A long sigh sounded out. This naturally belonged to Yang Qindong. It had been 4 years since he had come to this world. He had been working hard to reach this scale. In the eyes of others, this might be considered very impressive. However, compared to the grand goal in his heart, it was still too far away. If he had 100 million people, even if it was only 20 million people, he would dare to go to Japan and completely occupy it. He would even dare to go to the southwest and southeast of the great Ming Dynasty. Unfortunately, there were less than 1 million people in Crimson City. Most of them were from conquering the First Shan Dynasty. Otherwise, the 150,000 people in front of him would be enough to make him worry. With a sigh, he thought that he still needed to encourage the people of Crimson City to have more children. Although he had done a series of encouraging measures before, many factories and land needed manpower. Some of the local women had no choice but to participate in farming. However, now that the people of Jiaoji were continuously sent to Ryukyu Island, those women could be idle. With them around, as long as the incentives were right, there was no need to worry about a large increase in the population. Turning his thoughts back, Yang Qindong raised his head and asked Tiger's Mane, "Is Nie Tong's 2nd Regiment in place?" "Young master, the day before yesterday, Commander Nie took the 2nd Regiment's Lung Feng and 10 battalions of naval auxiliary soldiers and headed towards Jiuzhen Prefecture's coastline. If I'm not mistaken, they should be preparing to take action." Yang Qindong nodded thoughtfully. "Tell Regiment Commander Nie that after conquering Jiuzhen County, don't rush to join us. Continue to send troops out of Sunan County and take it down first. If we need help here, let him know." In other words, there was no need for any reinforcements. With just these 10,000 soldiers, they would be able to take down Jiaoji County. Hearing this, Tiger's Mane nodded. "Yes, young master. I will inform Regiment Commander Nie of your orders. But can we really take down Jiaoji County with just us?" Whether it is the military strength or the territory, it is far greater than Jiuzhen County and Sunan County combined. Only Tiger's Mane, who had been by Yang Qindong's side for the longest time, dared to ask such a question. If it was someone else, they would only need to carry out the order. But his considerations were also very reasonable. Conquering a country was one thing. Conquering it was another. If they didn't have enough military strength, they wouldn't be able to do it. Ha! Yang Qindong first smiled, but he didn't immediately answer this question. Instead, he casually pointed outside the door. Following the direction of his finger, Tiger's Mane saw Hong Jin standing respectfully outside, waiting for Yang Qindong to summon him. "Isn't there General Hong Jin?" After casually saying this, Tiger's Mane suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, "Young master means to use him as a general." And then, "That's right." Yang Qindong directly interrupted Tiger's Mane's words and said with a smile, "That's right. There is a saying, to control the barbarians with the barbarians. We can form a Jiaozhi mercenary army and let them be in charge of the security of Jiaozhi County. Compared to us, they're more familiar with this place, right?" Yang Qindong was currently thinking about the Japanese army in the future. He had to admit that the Japanese army that invaded China didn't have enough military strength. So he came up with this idea. And it was because of this that he almost completed the act of a snake swallowing an elephant. Since others can use it, he can naturally use it too. In addition, he can also send some troublemakers to Resin City. In this way, without those troublemakers, Hong Jin's pressure will be reduced a lot. After Tiger's Mane understood Yang Qindong's intention, he looked at the young master with admiration. He really didn't know how the young master's brain worked. How could he come up with so many good ideas? Just like using the Jiaozhi mercenary army to govern the Jiaozhi people, he wouldn't have thought of this even if he was beaten to death. It wasn't that Tiger's Mane was stupid. It was just that no one had used this method before, so naturally he wouldn't have thought of it. Chapter 498. "Well, go and wake Hong Jin up," Yang Qindong said casually, then turned around and sat back on a big chair. In front of Tiger's Mane, he could do anything he wanted, but in front of a surrendered general like Hong Jin, he had to maintain his dignity. What was a superior? Not only did he have an imposing manner, but he also had to learn all kinds of methods and use all kinds of environments to enhance his imposing manner. Once he did it well, it would give his subordinates a lot of psychological pressure. When he issued an order, there would naturally be no second opinion. Not long after Yang Qindong sat down, Hong Jin came in under Tiger's Mane's lead. As soon as he entered the room, Hong Jin knelt on the ground, not daring to raise his head, and said in a very respectful voice, "Subordinate Hong Jin greets Duke of Loyalty." As a surrendered general, Hong Jin was very clear about his identity. Not only in front of Yang Qindong, but even in front of some ordinary mercenary officers, he was very respectful. Therefore, for a long time, no one really made things difficult for him. Originally, under the leadership and teaching of Yang Qindong, the mercenaries were very particular about the equality between officers and soldiers. Even if a soldier joined the army, as long as he was not too arrogant, no one would make trouble for him. If Hong Jin's attitude was slightly better, it would be even worse to say that no one would want to make things difficult for him. Yes. Seeing Hong Jin kneeling in front of him so respectfully, Yang Qindong nodded and then said casually, "You did a good job." Hearing the praise, Hong Jin, who was kneeling there, felt happy. However, he still said cautiously, "It's all thanks to the Duke of Loyalty's good teachings." "All right, there's no need to call me Duke of Loyalty. You're my man, so just call me Sixth Young Master from now on." Yang Qindong slowly straightened his body as he spoke. The change in address meant that he had been initially accepted by Yang Qindong. Hong Jin, who was overjoyed, quickly kowtowed to the ground and said, "Yes, Sixth Young Master." Yang Qindong could understand the slight tremor in Hong Jin's voice. After all, even though the Hong family had some power, it was still far from the Yuan, Chun, Li, Fan, Huang, and Pan families. It could be said that at this moment, Hong Jin really wanted to be understood and recognized. Yang Qindong, who fully understood this, wanted to give Hong Jin a chance to stand out. Hong Jin, have you ever thought of putting down the things you're doing and doing something else? The work at hand was to settle the Han people who came from all parts of Jiaoji. Even though this job didn't seem like much, most of the Han Chinese who came here were in a daze. Many of them didn't even know why they were here. They were all forced to come here by the Jiaoji army. These people didn't have any feelings of gratitude or excitement. Even so, Hong Jin was happy to do these things. In his opinion, some things wouldn't have much effect if he didn't do them at the beginning, but as time passed, as long as he treated these Han people well, they would eventually remember him. Who knew when one or two of these people would stand out? At that time, if they were willing to take care of him, that would be the greatest reward. It was precisely because he had such an idea in his heart that when he suddenly heard Yang Chendong say that he was not allowed to take care of this matter, panic appeared on his face. He didn't know if he did something wrong or if he did something that Yang Chendong wasn't satisfied with. Therefore, his first reaction was to kowtow to the ground again. Then, he continued to explain, "Sixth young master, this lowly one does things in a rough manner. If there is anything that is not to your liking, please forgive this lowly one. This lowly one knows his mistakes and will definitely correct them." Mistake? What mistake did you make? Even with Yang Chendong's intelligence, he didn't know what to do with Hong Jin's actions. Hearing that there was no blame in Yang Chendong's words, Hong Jin slowly raised his head with a puzzled look. Just as Hong Jin raised his head, Yang Chendong's voice sounded. "This young master wants to give you a chance to stand out, a chance to bring glory to your Han clan. How about this? You form an army, and you will be the general. The number of people should be around 30,000. Other than the advanced firearms, this young master will provide you with any other weapons. How about it?" Before Yang Chendong could finish his words, there was a heavy thud on the ground. Looking carefully, it was the sound of Hong Jin kneeling and kowtowing. It was just a few kowtows, and there was already blood flowing out from his forehead. "Sixth young master, thank you. Thank you. I won't say anything else. I will remember your kindness. In the future, if you tell me to go east, I will definitely not go west. The Han clan will also follow the sixth young master's lead for the rest of my life." It was no wonder that Hong Jin was so emotional. He had worked very hard since he was young, and that was why he had the chance to become Ruan Gongwang's deputy general and lead an army alone. Although he failed in the end when he faced the mercenary army. Didn't he do all this for the sake of bringing glory to the Han clan? Now, the usually strong Jiaoji army was so weak in the face of the mercenary army. If things went wrong, Jiaoji would be in big trouble. It was hard to say if the Han clan would be able to survive. And it was at this time that Yang Chendong allowed him to form his own army. Such a huge contrast was equivalent to a person who was so poor that he couldn't afford to eat, suddenly finding a 10 million check in his bowl while begging for food. How could he not be excited and filled with gratitude? Hong Jin knelt there with tears of gratitude on his face. Then, he kept swearing. Yang Chendong saw all this, but he wasn't moved. He didn't really want to pity anyone. Because when he thought about how the Han clan would have to be slaves for a few hundred years if it wasn't for his appearance, he was furious. Back then, did anyone pity the Han clan? Of course, the answer was no. In this world, it was sad to rely on other people's pity to survive. The most important thing was to have your own strength. As long as he had enough strength, he would be able to gain the recognition and respect of others. Everything else was just fleeting clouds. As for what Hong Jin said, it might be true now. But when he really obtained a high position, when the mercenary army's strength couldn't affect him, who knew what he would do? Instead of placing his hopes on others, it was better to set strict rules from the start. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about other people causing trouble. All right, stop kowtowing. Your body is your own. This young master still needs you. If you get injured because of this and can't lead the army, then I'll have to consider changing you. As Yang Chendong said this, Hong Jin knelt there obediently. Obviously, he was really afraid that Yang Chendong would change him. If that was the case, all his hard work and performance would go down the drain. Seeing that Hong Jin's breathing had stabilized, he wasn't as agitated as before. Yang Shindong's voice sounded again. This young master can allow you to lead an army, but you have to agree to 3 conditions in advance. If you can do it, then this job is yours. If you can't do it, then there's no need to force yourself. This young master won't punish you for this. But if you can't do it, then you won't even have a chance to be free. Do you understand? Understood, this little one understands. 6 young master, just tell me what to do. At this moment, Hong Jin didn't have the ability to bargain. He had already thought it through. No matter how harsh Yang Qindong's conditions were, he would agree to all of them. No matter how high the requirements were, it was better than not knowing what would happen tomorrow. Seeing that Hong Jin agreed so quickly, Yang Qindong didn't doubt his sincerity. After all, if he was in Hong Jin's shoes, he wouldn't be able to reject the opportunity to lead an army either. Then listen carefully. First, 30,000 soldiers is a limit. No matter what happens in the future, unless there's an order for you, the number of soldiers can't exceed this number. If you're found out, you'll be stripped of your position and investigated. Second, these 30,000 soldiers must listen to the arrangements of the mercenary army unconditionally. If you or any of your subordinates dare to have any selfish thoughts, you'll be killed without mercy. Even you won't be able to escape the crime of not managing your army properly. Third, those who are capable in the Hong family can join the army. Those who aren't can't be forced to join. As for the other Hong family members who aren't young, or the elderly, children, and women, this young master will arrange for them to live in another place. I guarantee that they'll have a good life and won't be in any danger. However, they can't live in Jiaoji anymore. It's up to you to decide how to do this job. These are the 3 conditions. If you agree to them, this young master will also promise you what I just said. If you don't, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Yang Shindong stated the 3 conditions and waited for Hong Jin's reply. He didn't have any intention of forcing Hong Jin. There were some things that couldn't be done well without the initiative. As for why he wanted to form a Jiaoji mercenary army, it was because the number of mercenaries he had was still too little. If he had to leave behind a sizable army for every territory he conquered, then no amount of mercenaries would be enough. After Yang Qindong finished speaking, Hong Jin, who was kneeling on the ground, heard everything clearly and quickly came to a decision. 6th young master, Hong Jin is willing. Hong Jin naturally understood the meaning behind Yang Qindong's words. He wouldn't be allowed to grow, let alone form his own faction. At the end of the day, he would only be a puppet. Even so, he was still a general of 30,000 soldiers. As long as he didn't go overboard, there shouldn't be any problems. Compared to those Jiaoji generals who wanted to go against the mercenary army, those people were destined to die. Hong Jin was already very fortunate to have what he had. Why would he be unwilling? Chapter 499. What's more, Yang Qindong had also said that as long as the Hong family members were capable, they could also be brought into the army. As long as the descendants of the Hong family worked hard and were nurtured well, this 30,000-strong army would be equivalent to the Hong family's own army. Other than a powerful mercenary group, no one else would be able to suppress him. This could also be considered as bringing glory to the Hong family. Hong Jin agreed. This was within Yang Qindong's expectations. All right, since that's the case, Tiger's Mane will tell you what to do. From now on, you can put down whatever you're doing. Tomorrow was the 10th day. Yang Qindong had already made his preparations and was about to launch a fierce offensive. Naturally, he would have to put aside the matter of accepting the Hans for now. However, Hong Jin did not know about this. He thought that someone else would take over his job. Now that he was focused on becoming a general, he kowtowed and expressed his gratitude before leaving with Tiger's Mane. After exiting the room, Tiger's Mane walked out while speaking to Hong Jin, who had his head lowered and was 1 step behind him. You're quite lucky. The young master chose you because of your recent good performance. However, I hope that you can continue to work hard and don't think of other things. Yes, Tiger's Mane is right. Hong Jin will remember. Since the young master has allowed you to become a general, you can go and pick soldiers now. There are 20,000 Jiaoji citizens in Beidai City. Among them, there are around 6,000 youths. You can choose 2,000 of them to follow the mercenary army to the battlefield tomorrow. Of course, you won't be doing anything dangerous. You'll just have to clean up the battlefield, watch over the prisoners, and collect military supplies. Tiger's Mane spoke softly, but these words were like a bolt from the blue in Hong Jin's ears. His mind went blank. Tomorrow, tomorrow? Yes. Tiger's Mane nodded. Since he had decided to use Hong Jin, there were some things that he was not afraid of in advance. The young master and Jiaoji have been feigning civility for 9 days. All the preparations have been completed. Naturally, it's time to turn hostile. Hong Jin could no longer hear Tiger's Mane's next words. His mind was still muddled. He had always thought that the mercenaries couldn't take down the entire Jiaoji, and he didn't want to continue fighting. That was why he decided to negotiate with them. As for his position as a general, it should only be to protect Chu, Yi, and Beidai cities. But now, he realized that he couldn't see through Yang Chendong at all. Naturally, he couldn't know what Yang Chendong was really thinking. Could it be that Jiaoji is really going to be destroyed? As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Hong Jin became excited. If he only wanted to govern Chu, Yi, and the northern belt before, wouldn't he be able to govern the entire Jiaoji region? If that was the case, he would have a lot of power. The excitement only lasted for a moment before Hong Jin thought of another terrifying result. His Hong family was still in Jiuzhen Prefecture. Because both sides were negotiating, the Jiaoji army naturally wouldn't do anything to the Hong family. But once the war started, how could he guarantee his family's safety? Tiger's Mane, my Hong family, Hu Mang already knew what Hong Jin wanted to say, so he directly interrupted him and said, "Your Hong family doesn't need to worry." At this moment, the Jiuzhen County should have already been captured by the mercenary navy. Your Hong family will be safe. Jiuzhen Prefecture. It faced the sea from east to west, connected to Jiaoji Prefecture in the north, and connected to Renan Prefecture in the south. It was an important transportation link in Jiaoji. Previously, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stayed here to stabilize the situation in Jiaoji. But because Hanoi City was in danger, the old King Lily didn't care. The Crown Prince had no choice but to leave for the capital to find a solution. After the Crown Prince left, the normally tense Jiaoji officials were relieved that there was no longer a curse on their heads. Although the mercenaries had appeared in Chu Yi City and Beidai City, they were still some distance away from them. Not to mention, they had already received orders to send all the Han people out to negotiate with the mercenaries. Since it was a peace negotiation, there was no need to worry about the safety here. Coincidentally, it was drizzling today, so the generals and soldiers guarding the coastline went into their rooms to slack off. May Island. It was near Wuji City, the source of the eastern coastline of Jiaoji. Usually, there were hundreds of Jiaoji soldiers stationed here. Once they discovered any enemy, they would immediately light the beacon on the island to provide information to the city less than 100 miles away. It was drizzling today. It had been raining since morning, and there was even a moderate drizzle in the afternoon. Under such terrible weather, the visibility on the sea was not high. The Jiaoji soldiers in charge of the lookout could only see about 20 meters ahead of them. Beyond that, all they could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. With their vision obstructed and the fact that there had been no enemy here for many years, the soldiers let down their guard. Under the drizzle, other than the 2 lookout posts on the north and south, the rest of the soldiers had gone to rest in the barracks. In this environment where not even a single bird could be seen, a small boat slowly approached Miao Island. When it was about 100 meters away from the island, it suddenly stopped. Rain and fog were everywhere, forming a very good protection, making it difficult for people to spot it. As soon as the boat came to a stop, 8 men in black tights appeared on the boat and disappeared in a flash. After a few soft splashes, the 8 men dived into the water and headed straight for Miao Island, which was 100 meters away. Just like the Wolf Fong Special Forces on land, they were like a sharp knife that could be stabbed into the enemy's chest at any time. In the Navy, Division Commander Gao Xiong had invested a lot of energy and resources to form an elite team that struck fear in the hearts of the enemy. They were the Marine Corps. Since its establishment, the Marine Corps had completed no less than 20 missions. Many ships traveling in this sea area wanted to quietly pass by without paying the protection fee. But in the end, the ships sank to the bottom of the sea, which was partly due to their efforts. This time, in order to complete the mission taught by the 6th Young Master, Commander Nietong had transferred a platoon of Marine Corps from Division Commander Gao Xiong. The 8 men just now were just the first batch of soldiers to enter the sea. With the first batch, there would naturally be a second batch. In the blink of an eye, another 8 men had disappeared into the sea. After a few more batches, a platoon of 30 soldiers had entered the sea. About half an hour after these people entered the sea, many large warships appeared behind the small boat. It was as if they had descended from the sky. They first appeared in the white fog, then slowly approached Miao Island. The soldiers on May Island were completely unaware of this. They did not know that their fate had already been decided at this moment. They also did not know that at the edge of the island, 30 mercenaries armed with Type 95 mercenaries had already landed on the shore and were slowly approaching them. They had already practiced infiltration and landing on the island countless times. It was just a group of 100 unprepared enemies. These elite soldiers did not even consider them a threat. If not for the fact that they were afraid of alerting the enemy and causing them to ignite the fire beacon, which would hinder their next attack on the beach, they would not have needed to infiltrate like this and would have directly attacked. Even though they were very confident in their own combat strength, when they reached the island from the sea, the 30 elite soldiers did not immediately make their move. Instead, they carefully observed the terrain, discovering that it was the same as what they had predicted. Other than the 2 Jiaoji soldiers on the lookout posts, there were no other enemies. As the platoon leader of the Marine Corps, Feng Liao raised his right hand and made a gesture. Following that, the 10 soldiers advanced forward like foxes. This squad of soldiers was not only responsible for dealing with the enemies on the lookout posts, they were also responsible for protecting the beacon towers that could be ignited at any time. As for Feng Liao, he led the remaining 2 squads of soldiers towards the only military camp on the island, which was a row of stone bungalows. Without any warning, the silencer on the 95 gun fired a bullet. The 2 Jiaoji soldiers who were still dozing off saw the King of Hell. Following the elimination of the outer sentries, Feng Liao ran and the rest began to increase their speed. However, their worries were unfounded. Even when they rushed to the entrance of the bungalow, they were still not discovered, and not a single person walked out of the bungalow. Prepare the smoke grenades. Feng Liao raised his right hand and ordered while holding his gun. Ever since the smoke grenades were taken out by Yang Chendong from the warehouse, they had been the research object of the Crimson City's arsenal. Finally, they had successfully replicated it a while ago. However, because too many things were involved, they were still unable to mass produce them. However, an elite force like the Marine Corps was naturally equipped with them. Break the door and throw the grenades. With a very straightforward battle order, a Marine raised his right leg and fiercely kicked towards the camp gate. Clang! The moment the door was opened, 2 smoke grenades were successfully thrown in. Then, the door was closed. 2 platoons of Marines stared at the door. 21 muzzles were aimed at it to prevent any accidents from happening. Cough, cough, cough. In less than 2 breaths of time, loud coughing sounds echoed throughout the camp. Then, the camp door was pushed open, and the Jiaoji soldiers who were choking with tears in their eyes ran out. The first Jiaoji soldier who ran out did not even have time to see what was going on outside when he felt his body become light and was sent flying. Before he could regain his composure and see what was going on around him, a cold muzzle was pointed at his head. Chapter 500. The second soldier suffered the same fate, followed by the third. The fourth, it was just like a normal drill. There were only 20 Marines, and they captured all of the Jiaoji soldiers who were running around alone. From the moment they broke through the door to the end, it took less than 15 minutes, and the overall situation was decided. Maple Piaron led 2 of his team members into the barracks, but there was only a mess here. When there was not a single person in sight, the battle was declared to have ended. The swift action plan and lightning-fast surprise attack gave people the feeling that they were using a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. Even though Maple, Piaron, and the other soldiers had complete control of May Island, they did not show any excitement on their faces. Perhaps to them, the mission was too easy to complete, and there was no longer any sense of challenge, let alone excitement. The warship behind them sailed past May Island. When Commander Nyeyong saw Maple, Piaron, and the other soldiers saluting him, he immediately returned a standard military salute and then said to the deputy commander beside him, "Leave one warship for platoon leader Maple. The rest of the ships move forward at full speed. The destination is No Weave City." After the order was given, the steam-powered ships that had been modified by the shipyard in Chichen City suddenly emitted black smoke, and like an arrow released from a bow, they flew across the sea and headed straight for No Weave City, which was dozens of miles away. No Weave City. It was still drizzling, but the soldiers and civilians of Jiaoji who had long been accustomed to such terrible weather did not have much of an impact. The city gates were wide open, and people were constantly entering and exiting. All kinds of hawking sounds could be heard, and it was very lively. On the tower of No Weave City, a Jiaoji soldier was leaning against a stone pillar and taking a nap. Perhaps it was the raindrops that fell on his face, causing him to slowly open his eyes at this moment. As he reached out to wipe the raindrops off his face, his gaze swept across the distance, and then he closed his eyes to continue his nap. But just as his head was about to lower, he suddenly thought of something and opened his eyes abruptly. He then pointed at the coastline in the distance with a somewhat shocked expression, and his voice also became a little stuttered due to the fear. "Enemy, enemy, enemy, enemy attack." Following this shout, the large ship in the distance had finished docking, and more black figures were running in this direction. More and more Jiaoji soldiers saw this scene from the top of the city walls and fell into chaos. Caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the enemy along the coastline, and without receiving any signal from Mi Island, the Jiaoji soldiers were completely unprepared. They didn't even have the time to close the city gates. All they could do was watch helplessly as the mercenaries in white sailor uniforms approached and entered the city. No Weave City is finished. Southern Ming Dynasty's capital, Nanjing House. The travel-worn Jiaoji diplomatic group entered the city. When the news reached the ears of Zhu Qijin, who was having a meal with Empress Qian in the palace, a smile finally appeared on his face. Long before the Jiaoji diplomatic mission entered the southern border, the embroidered uniform guard in charge of gathering information had already found out about their objective. The Duke of Zhongdang had unexpectedly led his troops through the Langsun region. Following that, he took down Tsui and Beidai, catching the Jiaoji army by surprise. When the news spread, even Zhu Qijin was shocked. He knew how powerful Yang Qindong was, and he had a clear understanding and evaluation of the military strength of the mercenaries. However, he still didn't expect them to be so powerful and so fast. They actually managed to kill their way into the inner region of Jiaoji. It took him a long time to calm down from the shock. Zhu Qijin was overjoyed as he knew his chance had come. Although Yang Qindong's strength was not what he wanted to see, his current actions had indeed solved a lot of problems for him. Once the southwest Jiaoji surrendered, Sheeping King Mu Bin would be free and would no longer need to defend the southwest. When that time comes, he would be able to send out his troops to attack the Min King. If that was the case, then he had seen hope in reclaiming the lost land in the southwest. The excited Zhu Qijin suppressed the urge to order Mu Bin to send out his troops. He decided to see what the Jiaoji envoy group had to say first. Since they were here to admit defeat, he was not going to let them off the hook this time. He was going to squeeze them dry. He wouldn't forget that if the Jiaoji army hadn't helped the Min King, how could the other party have become so powerful? He also wouldn't forget that old man Lili still wanted to marry his third princess. "What's wrong, Your Majesty? You seem to be very happy." Empress Qian noticed that Zhu Qijin became much more excited after Chao Jixiang came over and told him about the Jiaoji diplomatic mission. As the Empress, she was naturally happy for the Emperor. "Haha, Empress, we can finally hold our heads high this time. Just watch. It won't be long before the matter of the Southwest is resolved." Once that matter is resolved, we will work hard to govern. There will come a day when we return to the capital of the north. There can only be one great Ming, and there must be one. Seeing the emperor in such high spirits, Empress Qian was naturally overjoyed. She even ate an extra bowl of rice due to her poor appetite. The Jiaoji diplomatic mission entered the capital. As soon as they entered the relay station, they sent a letter to the Bureau of Rights, requesting an audience with Luda, the Minister of Rights, and the Emperor of the Southern Ming Dynasty. Zhu Qizhen had already issued a decree, so how could Luda allow the other party to meet the Emperor so easily? Even he didn't plan on meeting the other party immediately. Instead, he sent a right assistant minister to probe the other party's bottom line. In Nanjing, the Jiaoji diplomatic mission and the Southern Ming Bureau of Rights were still probing each other. Within Jiaoji, scouts were galloping on horseback. They were all soldiers sent by the various cities of Jiuzhen County to ask for reinforcements. In the face of Nietong's Lang Fengai army and 2 naval auxiliary divisions, they had captured one city after another. In just the first day, Wuji and Shupu cities had fallen. If there were no accidents, tomorrow at this time, the city walls would not be high, and the defenders would only have 2,000 soldiers, so Jufeng City would also be breached. Such speed made the generals of the various cities of Jiuzhen County tremble in fear. They could only send people out to Hanei City to ask for reinforcements. However, even the generals who sent people out knew that distant water couldn't quench their immediate thirst. Before reinforcements arrived, they would lose their cities and their positions. This time, even if they lost, they couldn't understand why. Didn't they say they were going to negotiate? Moreover, the negotiations were going smoothly. Why did the mercenaries suddenly attack? What was going on? Jiaoji Prime Minister Ruan Chuncheng also didn't understand what was going on. While they were eating dinner in their temporary residence, the head of the guards suddenly came to report that there were many more mercenaries outside the residence. They had actually surrounded the residence. They surrounded us? What do they want? Ruan Chuncheng hurriedly put down his chopsticks and looked at the guard captain in confusion. This subordinate doesn't know. The guard captain shook his head and added, "However, those people don't seem to have any intention of charging in. They're just guarding the door and preventing our people from entering. They're only surrounding us? Could it be that there's a change in the military situation?" The Prime Minister was indeed the Prime Minister. Ruan Chuncheng immediately thought of a possibility. Then he exclaimed, "Quickly, go negotiate with the mercenaries outside. I want to see the Duke of Loyalty. If that doesn't work, I can also see General Hong Jin." The sudden change made Ruan Chuncheng's expression change greatly, although he still didn't know what had happened outside. Although he didn't know what was going on outside, just the fact that the residence was surrounded was enough for him to think of the worst. "Sir, this subordinate has tried, but the other party didn't pay attention to me." The guard captain first raised his head and looked at Yang Qindong with a very difficult expression. Then he lowered his head again. Plop! Ruan Chuncheng sat back down on the wooden chair. His eyes were glazed over. He knew that this time the matter was serious. The moment Prime Minister Ruan's temporary residence was surrounded was the moment the mercenaries set out. 50,000 young Han people from Jiaoji had already entered Beidai City. Along with them were 5,000 Type 81 rifles made in Qiqian City's arsenal, as well as 20 individual rocket launchers and some corresponding firearms and ammunition. This was all that the munitions factory had in stock at the moment. Although Gao Xiong had dominated the seas with the navy and obtained a lot of copper and iron, the actual production was still very low. It was different from the production lines of factories in the future. Many things still needed to be completed by manpower. This made it so that during normal times, the things produced could still be used by the army. However, once there was a war, the production and consumption could not be proportional. For this matter, Yang Qindong had ordered the arsenal to continue expanding. His footsteps of conquering the world did not want to stop because of firearms and ammunition. However, some things could not be eaten in one bite. It needed to be digested and absorbed slowly. The manufacturing of weapons was based on this principle. The 5000 Type 81 rifles sent from the rear were only for Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers to use. After all, if a gun fired too many bullets, there would be problems with the rifling. Problems such as the accuracy of the gun and the jamming of bullets would follow one after another. It was necessary to have a replacement port. The lack of firearms was also the reason why Yang Qindong allowed Hong Jin to form his own mercenary army. Firstly, there would be someone to manage Jiaoji in the future. Secondly, to prevent firearms from being wasted for no reason, there would be a need for some cold weapons battles. This was the time when Hong Jin and the rest could be used. Chapter 501. However, in order to prevent a situation like this from happening in the future, they were only allowed to have 30,000 soldiers. This was a form of self-protection. With weapons and sufficient manpower, Yang Qindong did not want to wait any longer. He wanted to take down Jiaoji first. This was the first step towards achieving his life goal. If he could not even conquer a small country like Jiaoji, how could he conquer the entire world? Only one auxiliary battalion and one temporary auxiliary battalion were left in Beidai City. Not counting the companies directly under the regiment, there were a total of 20 fully staffed battalions. They set off from Beidai City towards Hanoi City. The person in charge of the vanguard was the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Kong Chuanxin. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Wu Sheng, was still fighting the black soldiers of the Jiaoji Chun Heijin tribe in the Langsun region. The commander of the 2nd Battalion, Chun Bo, had led his men to take down Beidai City previously. This time, it was finally Kong Chuanxin's 3rd Battalion's turn to make a name for themselves. 9 days ago, Battalion Commander Kong received the news. He gathered 4 of his elite company commanders and trained them according to the situation in Hanoi. Now that the army was finally ready to depart, the 3rd Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front set off 2 hours ahead of the main force. The moment they left Beidai City, Commander Kong Chuanxin gave the order for the troops to set off at full speed. He only gave everyone 20 hours to cover the distance of nearly 200 miles. This was a forced march. The troops had to reach Hanoi City before daybreak and rest for at least 4 hours before starting the siege. Once the order was given, it had to be carried out. The requirement to cover 200 li in 20 hours did not tire the soldiers out. On the contrary, they were all excited. Even the 4 auxiliary battalions at the back of the troops had high morale. After witnessing the power of the continuous fire guns, there was not a single soldier who did not want to own a gun of their own. Thus, becoming an auxiliary battalion became the hope of many. They did not have the chance in the past. Now that the opportunity was right in front of them, everyone was fighting to be the first. It was precisely because of their strong morale that the 7 battalions of mercenaries marched at a speed that somewhat exceeded the expectations of Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. They actually ran all the way to Hanoi City. Based on this speed, it was likely that they would arrive 2 hours earlier than the original plan. This would give everyone more time to rest under the city, and they would have more confidence in taking down Hanoi City in one battle. Hanoi City. Under King Li Li's complete control, everything here was managed by the Crown Prince Li Yuanlong. When they arrived at Hanoi from Jiuzhen Prefecture, Li Yuanlong was a little worried. From time to time, there would be mercenaries patrolling the waters around the Jiuzhen Prefecture, so he knew better than anyone else what kind of opponent he was facing. With the current strength of the Jiaoji kingdom, they had no chance of winning against the cannons and guns. Unless they could produce more ironware, they might be able to rely on their defense and terrain advantage to resist for a period of time. It seemed that Li Yuanlong was worried about whether he had enough time. Fortunately, he had sent out his trump card, Prime Minister Ruan Chuncheng, and he did not let him down. As soon as he entered Beidai City, he stabilized the momentum of the mercenaries. With sufficient time and the diplomatic mission sent to the capital of the Southern Ming dynasty, Nanjing, once the Southern Ming Emperor issued an imperial edict, the loyal Duke of the Great Ming dynasty would have no choice but to give up. The hope of the Jiaoji kingdom would reappear. It seemed that the situation was developing in his favor. Li Yuanlong's complexion had also improved a lot over the past few days. In addition, he did not place his hopes on anyone else. The blacksmiths in the army were working day and night to produce iron shields. Even some of the private blacksmiths in the city were temporarily recruited to help with the production of iron carriages. They had already produced 10 iron carriages that could accommodate 200 people, as well as 2,000 iron shields. With this, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. After all, Jiaoji had been established for more than 20 years, so it still had some war reserves. Otherwise, how would it dare to agree to the Min King's request to stir up trouble in the southern Ming Empire? Just like now, after a few days of adjustment, there were now about 80,000 soldiers in Hanoi City. With the existence of these 80,000 soldiers, Hanoi City gave outsiders the impression that it was impregnable. Nearly 300,000 citizens of Hanoi City walked out of the fog of war, and the businesses on the streets returned to normal. From afar, it was a bustling scene. However, all of this changed as the scout in front of them galloped into the city. Report: Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had just finished inspecting the military supplies and returned to his residence. He did not even have the time to sit down and drink a cup of tea before he saw the scout, who was drenched in the rain. For some reason, Li Yuanlong's heart skipped a beat when he saw the scout in such a sorry state. He had a bad feeling about this. However, he did not show it. Instead, he tried his best to stabilize his body and mind. "Why are you panicking?" "Reporting to your highness, the Crown Prince." This morning, the gates of Beidai City suddenly opened wide. Then, thousands of mercenaries came out of the gates and headed straight for Hanoi City. After the anxious scout finished reporting, he couldn't help but gulp a mouthful of saliva. From the moment he received the news until he returned to the city, he did not stop for a moment. As a result, his body was severely dehydrated. However, he did not have the time to drink water. He only wanted to deliver the news as soon as possible so that the Crown Prince could be prepared. Even though he was mentally prepared, when he heard the scout's report, Li Yuanlong could not help but feel a wave of dizziness. The scout's figure also swayed in front of him. After a few breaths, Li Yuanlong slowly adjusted his breathing. Then, he tried his best to use a calm voice to ask, "You said that there were thousands of people coming out of the city. How many are there?" "Around 3,000. The scout thought for a moment before replying cautiously. Anyone who could become a scout was not only agile, but more importantly, had extraordinary eyesight. Otherwise, erroneous military intelligence could lead to extremely serious consequences. Even though he only saw the mercenaries coming out of the city, he was still able to estimate the enemy's actual military strength. When he heard that there were only 3,000 people, Li Yuanlong's originally panicked emotions became much more stable. If it was just these people, it might not mean that the mercenaries were really going to war with the Jiaoji kingdom. Perhaps there were other reasons. After all, no matter how powerful the enemy was, it was too much to expect 3,000 people to take down the capital of Jiaoji, which had 80,000 soldiers and 300,000 citizens. "All right, this Crown Prince understands. Men, send him away to rest." Li Yuanlong's mind instantly flashed with countless possibilities. When he saw that the scout had left, he said to another guard beside him, "Immediately go and find General Fan and General Ruan." In less than an hour, the famous general of the Jiaoji kingdom, Fan Yuhai, General Ruan Gung Wang, Huang Hua, Li Xiaozhong, and the others hurriedly arrived at the Crown Prince's residence. Even though they didn't know what had happened, the Crown Prince's sudden summons meant that something big must have happened. When the generals arrived at the main hall of the Crown Prince's residence, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong walked into the hall under the protection of a few guards. "Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince." The generals bowed. "Generals, there's no need to be so courteous." Li Yuanlong sat down on a large chair and swept his gaze across the generals. Then, he said in a low voice, "I just received a report from a scout that 3,000 mercenaries suddenly came out of Beidai City. They are heading straight for our Hanoi City. Perhaps they will appear at the city's gates tomorrow." "What?" When the generals heard this, their expressions changed. It was obvious that they were shocked by this sudden news. However, this change in expression didn't show fear. Instead, it revealed a hint of excitement. As for the mercenaries, Ruan Gungwang and Huang Hua were the only two generals who had fought with them. Moreover, Ruan Gungwang had fought with the mercenaries in the rainforest of Mount Liang. From the beginning to the end, he hadn't seen the mercenaries. Even though his losses weren't small, he didn't have any direct knowledge of them. On the contrary, ever since he returned to Hanoi City, he had been thinking about blood. However, because the Crown Prince's policy was to delay the negotiations, there was no room for him to display his skills. Now that he finally had a chance to fight, how could he not be excited? Ruan Gungwang wasn't the only one who thought this way. Other than Huang Hua, all the other generals had the same thought. The Crown Prince's words were very clear. This time, there were only 3,000 mercenaries. 3,000 people. How big a storm could they cause? If the other party had only sent 30,000 people, it might be scary. However, with the difference in numbers, how could they show the slightest bit of fear? Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was also paying attention to the reactions of the generals. He was very satisfied with the answer. Other than Huang Hua and Fan Yuhai, who were frowning, the other generals had an eager expression. They couldn't wait to lead their troops in a battle. Huang Hua's performance was within Li Yuanlong's expectations. This person had once led 5,000 mercenaries to attack Beidai City. The result was a crushing defeat. With such a shadow in his heart, it was normal for him to have no confidence when facing the mercenaries. However, Fan Yuhai was also frowning. What did this mean? At this moment, Li Yuanlong couldn't figure it out. Chapter 502. General Fan. What do you think of the current situation? Li Yuanlong called out his name. In fact, Fan Yuhai, who could be called a famous general, had some weight in the eyes of both Li Yuanlong and Li Yuanlong. Fan Yuhai, who was called out, first bowed and then raised his eyebrows. Your Highness, previously we were negotiating with the mercenaries, and we even sent a lot of Han people over. Logically speaking, we should be cooperating happily, but why would they suddenly send troops over? What is the reason? Or did something happen that we don't know about? In my opinion, before things are clear, it's better not to use weapons. Fan Yuhai's words could be said to be an experienced strategist. The art of war said to subdue the enemy's soldiers without fighting the best of the best. Above all, the best strategy was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. In other words, it was best not to use weapons if possible. Especially in this kind of battle where one had no confidence, one had to be extremely careful. The other generals were clearly dissatisfied with Fan Yuhai's words. The so-called generals were naturally the ones who led the troops. However, if the world was peaceful, their existence would not be so meaningful, and they would inevitably be looked down upon. Therefore, a true general needed to use war to prove himself. Fan Yuhai only said that the situation was strange and needed to be investigated. If this was not to stop the soldiers, what else could it be? It would be strange if he could gain the support of the other generals. If it wasn't for the Crown Prince personally stating his stance, there would have been people criticizing Fan Yuhai and even impeaching him for being afraid of battle. This couldn't be said to be groundless. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong listened to Fan Yuhai's words seriously and then nodded in tacit agreement. That's right, General Fan's words are exactly what this Crown Prince is worried about. Before we can figure out what's going on, it's best if we don't use our weapons. Hearing that even the Crown Prince agreed with Fan Yuhai's words, Ruan Gungwang and the other generals were inevitably disappointed. They originally thought that they would not have the chance to lead troops this time. Unexpectedly, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong continued, "But if the mercenaries arrive tomorrow, what should we do? Are we going to let them show off and challenge us? Of course not. We don't want to go to war, but we aren't afraid of war. If the mercenaries really dare to do this, the soldiers of Jiaoji won't be afraid. We'll just go out of the city and destroy their prestige." Fan Yuhai raised his head and said with determination, "Anyone who could be called a famous general would not be a coward." It wasn't that Fan Yuhai didn't want to fight, but he didn't want to fight a cowardly battle without any basis. The so-called war was nothing more than a final choice in the face of the futility of peace talks and other situations. If there were other ways, no one would choose such a path that would waste manpower and resources. However, if the mercenaries were really looking down on the Jiaoji army, there was no harm in teaching them a lesson. However, there were only 3,000 of them. In Hanoi City, which had an army of 80,000, they were nothing in the eyes of the generals. After all, Jiaoji had been established for more than 20 years. Their military strength was definitely not limited to this. Previously, he had considered the fact that Hanoi City could not afford to station too many soldiers, so he had only sent 80,000. If he really wanted to mobilize, it would not be a problem to gather another 100,000 soldiers in the entire Jiaoji prefecture. Good. Hearing Fan Yuhai's words, Li Yuanlong replied happily. This was what he wanted. No matter what the mercenaries wanted to do in Hanoi City, they could not be allowed to do as they pleased. Otherwise, it would be a provocation to him, the crown prince. This was something that he would not allow and was unwilling to see. Li Yuanlong, who already had a plan in mind, immediately started to arrange the troops after hearing Fan Yuhai's words. Some negotiations had to be fought. The principle of peace through fighting was applicable at all times. Compared to Kong Chuanxin, who led the 3 battalions out of the city, Yang Qindong's troops were not as hurried out of the city. The 5,000 Lung Feng, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers naturally walked at the front of the group. Behind them were the 47,000 youths from Qiming City. After leaving behind 2,000 men in Shui City, 1,000 men from Beidai City were left behind to take charge of the various tasks in the city. At the end of the group was the general of Jiaoji, Hong Jin, and the 2,000 newly recruited Jiaoji mercenaries. After receiving Yang Qindong's instructions, Hong Jin used only a day to form a temporary army of 2,000 men. One had to admit that he was very efficient. If it wasn't for the fact that there were not many people of suitable age in Beidai City, he would probably have formed an even larger army. The 60,000 men group walked and stopped along the way. They were not in a hurry as they made their way from Beidai City to Hanoi City. Yang Qindong was in the middle of the group, riding on a strong white horse. In his hand was a handful of bullets that had just been transported. He had a look of deep thought on his face. These bullets were randomly selected by Tiger's Mane from the thousands of boxes of bullets that had been transported over. The moment the bullets were placed in Yang Qindong's hands, his expression became much more serious. Bullets were something that Yang Qindong had dealt with for many years in his previous life. From the moment the new recruits joined the company to the time he retired to the military supply department, due to his age, the number of bullets that passed through his hands numbered in the tens of thousands. He did not even need to open his eyes to look at the shape of the bullets. He only needed to touch them to know what kind of gun it was and what caliber it was. It was because he understood it so well that when he received the new bullets from Qiming City's factory, his heart was heavy. Even though Yang Qindong had taken out various books and finished bullets, they were still 500 years ahead of time. The various technologies were completely unable to keep up, causing the current process of manufacturing bullets to rely entirely on manual labor. This also caused the shape of the bullets to be completely different, and many of them were even unqualified. Just like the handful in Yang Qindong's hands, there were only a dozen bullets, and they were divided into several sizes. Among them, there were Type 81-7, 62mm bullets, and Type 95-5, 88mm bullets. Although these two sizes of bullets looked similar to the bullets used before, in reality, there were some differences in the shape and weight of the bullets. It was these differences that caused Yang Qindong a headache. Firearms were not a joke. Even for a sharpshooter, giving him a new gun would require time to get used to it. This was because even if the guns were mechanized, there would still be differences. Not to mention the bullets for these guns that were all made by hand. 5,000 newly shipped Type 81 rifles, 500 newly shipped Type 95 rifles. Yang Qindong had seen them all, and the differences were not small. Now that the differences in the bullets were so great, it would greatly reduce the accuracy of the bullets. This was where Yang Qindong was worried. First, the second batch of guns and bullets were slightly better. After all, they were all made by experienced blacksmiths. Although there were some differences, the problem was not too big. The accuracy on the battlefield could still reach about 70%. However, because of the increase in demand at the front, the munitions factory at the rear was constantly expanding. The new recruits were mostly inexperienced, so the specifications of the products were naturally much worse. Yesterday, at the temporary shooting range in Beatty City, Yang Shindong had tried it himself. With his strength, the bullets he shot only hit the target 60% of the time. After constant shooting correction, the hit rate finally reached more than 80%. It was easy to imagine that after equipping the normal auxiliary soldiers, they would have a 30% accuracy rate. That would already be very good. This was the case when technology was not developed. Yang Shindong also knew that some things could not be forced. He could only hope that the soldiers could quickly adapt to the new guns and bullets and not let these things adapt to them. Yang Shindong, who was riding on the horse, suddenly opened his eyes and said to Tiger's Mane, who was also riding on the side, "Inform the army that there is no need to rush. Every morning and afternoon, set aside an hour for target practice." Target practice? Tiger's Mane's face showed a look of confusion. He wanted to say that target practice was a waste of bullets, and even the wear and tear of the guns was not small. But since it was an order from the young master, of course, he would unconditionally carry it out. He nodded, then turned around and rode off to inform the army. How could Yang Shindong not know about these disadvantages? But if the soldiers were not fully adapted to the guns and ammunition, when faced with the charge of the enemy on the battlefield, the guns in their hands would not be accurate. Once the enemy really rushed in front of them, the losses would be huge. No matter what, guns were inanimate objects. Now that they were worn out, they could kill more enemies on the battlefield, increase their accuracy, and reduce the number of casualties. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. Through target practice, the soldiers would be more compatible with the unique guns in their hands. This was the only thing Yang Shindong could do for the soldiers. Not long after the order was given, the army stopped, and close to 50,000 Crimson City, youth started to cook. Not far away, gunshots could be heard. The target practice had begun. The deafening gunshots caused the originally disorganized Jiaoji mercenaries to change their minds. At this moment, Hong Jin's words finally carried more weight, and more people knew what it meant to obey orders. Below Hanoi City, before midnight, the 7 battalions of mercenaries had arrived at a place 5 miles away from the city. They quickly set up tents here. Other than the 2 companies of soldiers who were in charge of guarding and keeping watch, the rest of the soldiers went to sleep after eating. Everyone knew that when dawn came, there would be a huge battle waiting for them. Chapter 503. While the soldiers were resting, Kong Chuanxin, as the battalion commander, did not go to rest. Instead, he called for his 4 company commanders and 6 auxiliary battalion commanders to gather around a bonfire for a meeting. Ever since they left Beidai City, Kong Chuanxin's excitement hadn't stopped. This was the first battle against the capital of the Jiaoji nation, Hanoi City. Now that it was handed over to him, it was enough to prove how much the 6th young master valued him. This was also the first time the mercenaries fought against an enemy's capital. It was bound to be recorded in the annals of history. As the commander of this battle, he was bound to be remembered in the history of the mercenaries. However, whether this record was good or bad would depend on tomorrow's performance. He called all the officers over for a discussion, even though there were 7 battalion commanders, including himself. But in reality, there were still some differences in strength. For example, Kong Chuanxin's position as the commander of the Cold Vanguard Battalion had the highest authority. He was equivalent to a battalion commander of the A Battalion. An auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a B Battalion, and a temporary auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a C Battalion. Therefore, right from the start of the meeting, Kong Chuanxin held the initiative. He didn't even bother to ask the other 6 battalion commanders what they thought. Instead, he focused his attention on Tian Su, the company commander of the 3rd Battalion's 1st Company. If the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Vanguard Battalion was the main offensive company. Then the commander of the 1st Company under him was the best company of the 3rd Battalion. At the very least, the destructive power and military strength of this company was far greater than that of an auxiliary battalion. Compared to the temporary auxiliary battalion, it was at least 3 to 4 times more powerful. 1st Company Commander, what do you think of being the main offensive force for tomorrow's battle? Kong Chuanxin asked directly without any pleasantries. Thank you for your trust. 1st Company will definitely complete the mission. Tiansu stood up excitedly. His face was flushed with excitement. Naturally, the other 3 company commanders of the 3rd Battalion were dissatisfied, but there was nothing they could do about it. After all, he was the company commander of the 1st Company. In the previous few small-scale competitions held in the barracks, the 1st Company had always been victorious. They were the most outstanding in all aspects, and this was also recognized by everyone. After considering the importance of tomorrow's battle, the 3 company commanders didn't say anything even though they were still a little jealous. It was a good thing to have a certain level of competition. However, if internal strife were to occur because of this, it would ultimately affect the overall combat strength of the entire 3rd Battalion. That would be a big deal. The result was very straightforward. Whoever had internal strife will be fired. Due to this reason, since the establishment of Cold Front, for company-level officers had been demoted because of internal strife. They had all been reported to the 6th Young Master for approval. The 4 company commanders, who originally had a bright future ahead of them, wanted to achieve more achievements, so they started to play tricks in the dark. Later, they were discovered by the government and reported to the 6th Young Master. The 4 of them were immediately removed from their positions and sent to the various factories in Crimson City for observation. If they didn't perform well, they would be sent to farm, and there would be no future for them. The 6th Young Master had said more than once that it was hard to find a 3-legged toad, but there were plenty of 2-legged people. Especially in the Cold Front, there were many heroes and heroines. Even without them, the Cold Front would still continue. If anyone dared to have such thoughts and wanted to challenge his bottom line, then they could try. After the incident with the 4 company commanders, the relationship between the officers had improved a lot. Normal competition still existed, and this was encouraged by the higher-ups. However, there were no longer any cases of people using unscrupulous methods to achieve victory. Perhaps there were still some who had such thoughts, but they definitely wouldn't dare to do it. When Tiansu was called out by Kong Chuanxin, his face was filled with excitement. Kong Chuanxin was also very satisfied with the morale of the other party. He nodded and said, "Good. Tomorrow morning, we will see your company's performance. The other battalions will cooperate with you. However, I will say the ugly words first. If your performance is not good, and you don't reach the standard of your usual training, then this battalion commander will have the authority to replace you at any time. When that time comes, don't come complaining to me. Yes, I promise to complete the mission." After saying this, Tiansu scratched his head embarrassedly. Obviously, this wasn't the first time he had complained to his superiors because he couldn't get the main attack mission. Kong Chuanxin quickly decided on the main attack mission, causing the auxiliary battalion commanders and temporary battalion commanders to be extremely envious. However, they could only be envious in their hearts. After all, Lung Feng's strength was there for all to see. Lung Feng was able to hit the target with 60% to 70% of the bullets that were issued later. However, the temporary battalion commanders only had an average of 30% of the bullets. With such a huge difference, even if they weren't convinced, they had no choice but to accept it. After the main attack mission was assigned, it was time to assign the auxiliary attack missions. Regarding this, the military plan had already been formulated before they set off from Beidao City. Now, it was just a matter of repeating it. It was because of this that the pre-battle meeting was conducted in an orderly manner. Compared to the calm mercenaries outside the city, the Jiaoji soldiers in Hanoi City were shocked by the sudden appearance of the enemy. The general on duty reported the discovery of the mercenaries to his superiors. When the news reached the ears of the crown prince, Li Yuanlong, who was in the palace, he was extremely shocked. The first thing he said was, "How can these mercenaries be so fast? Did they fall from the sky?" Li Yuanlong couldn't be blamed for this. The distance between Beidao City and Hanoi City was close to 200 li based on the speed of the Jiaoji army. It would normally take 3 days if they were fast, 4 to 5 days if they were slow. However, in less than a day, the mercenaries had already covered the entire distance. Just the speed alone was enough to make one look at them in a new light. The generals in the city were also summoned to the main hall of the palace. After hearing the news, they were all extremely shocked. Just like the time when Huang Hua led his army to attack Beidao City, he had already tried his best. However, it still took 2.5 days for 5,000 soldiers to reach Beidao City. In comparison, wouldn't his marching speed be no different from snails? Fortunately, this topic was quickly forgotten. The first thing everyone did when they gathered was to think about what to do next. The original plan was to leave the city the next day and arrange the troops to prepare for battle. However, from the looks of it now, it wasn't appropriate to do so. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong turned his attention to General Ruan Gengwang. After all, the first battle of the plan was to be completed by this person. Previously, Ruan Gengwang's troops had contributed greatly to the battle with King Min in Nanming Kingdom. When they deployed, they only had 50,000 men. Later on, they expanded to 100,000 men. They even brought back 10,000 captives and various treasures. At that time, he was in the limelight. At that time, Ruan Gengwang was also in the limelight and looked down on everyone. With the appearance of the mercenaries, the situation began to change. As a result, only 15% of his 100,000 men returned to Hanoi City. When they deployed 50,000 men, they only returned 15,000 defeated soldiers. This caused many people to question Ruan Gengwang's ability. Coincidentally, Prime Minister Ruan Chuncheung went to Beidao City to negotiate with the Jiaoji army. His position became even more precarious. Helplessly, he could only try his best to fight for the role of the vanguard. He hoped that he could redeem himself from the previous defeat and become a pillar among the generals again. Li Yuanlong also gave him a chance to turn over a new leaf. He used his position as crown prince to convince everyone. Not only did he not take back his original authority of 15,000 men, he gave him another 5,000 men, making 20,000 men as the vanguard. 20,000 men against 3,000 mercenaries. The ratio was 7-1. Furthermore, they were fighting on their home ground. No one saw the possibility of defeat. However, the sudden appearance of the mercenaries had caught them off guard. However, after the initial panic, Ruan Gengwang already walked out of the ranks in armor. He cupped his fist and said to Li Yuanlong, "Your Highness, I am willing to lead soldiers out of the city tonight to set up defenses in preparation for tomorrow's battle." Good. Li Yuanlong was waiting for this sentence. "Thank you for your hard work, General Ruan. In a while, you can go get 1,000 iron shields to prepare for tomorrow's battle. The other generals, do your own work according to what we discussed earlier. When the sky brightens, follow me to the city tower to take a look." Yes. All the generals bowed and replied in unison. Among them, Ruan Gengwang's face was flushed red. He was faintly excited. Not long after the generals came out of the palace returned to the camp, Ruan Gengwang's troops moved. 20,000 soldiers came out of the east side of the city and began to form a formation 2 miles away from the city. They made a huge commotion. This also attracted the attention of the mercenaries. The 2 company commanders in charge of security had their bayonets loaded with guns. If anything unexpected happened, they would fire their guns. Fortunately, Ruan Gengwang's troops only came out of the city and did not intend to attack immediately. Perhaps he also wanted to take action at dawn. This was an opportunity to perform well in front of the crown prince and the civil and military officials. If they attacked the camp now, even if they won, how many people would be able to see their majestic and heroic appearance? Fortunately, Ruan Gengwang did not send troops out at night. Otherwise, they who were not good at night battles would lose even more miserably. Of course, General Ruan did not understand this point yet. Everything would have to wait until dawn. After the results of the battle were out, he would know what it meant to strike a stone with an egg. Following this, even though the distance between the two armies was less than 3 miles, and the enemy's barracks could be seen from afar, it was still peaceful. When dawn broke the next day, smoke rose from the camp. The cooks started to get busy. A great battle was about to take place in Jiaoji. Chapter 504. Southern Ming Capital, Nanjing Imperial Palace. The Minister of Rites, Lu De, was asked to stay behind by Zhu Qizhen after the morning assembly. Compared to a while ago, Zhu Qizhen's face was much rosier, and his mental state was much stronger. Even when he spoke to his subjects, his tone was much friendlier. Minister Lu, how are the negotiations with the Jiaoji diplomatic mission going? Your Majesty, this subject is preparing to report this matter to you. Just last night, after the efforts of the officials from the Ministry of Rites, the Jiaoji diplomatic group finally agreed to submit to the Southern Ming dynasty. If needed, they can also send troops to attack the Min King's army. Your Majesty only needs to issue a decree for the Duke of Loyalty to disband the mercenaries. When talking about these, Lu De could be said to be talking nonstop, spittle flying everywhere. The so-called unity of the Ministry of Rites was actually nothing much. It was only because the Jiaoji diplomatic mission could not drag on any longer that they took the initiative to give in. However, other people didn't know about all this. Lu De could naturally put all the credit on his head and flatter himself. Oh, when Zhu Qizhen heard that Jiaoji was not only willing to submit, but also send troops to help him deal with the rebel king of Min's faction, his eyes widened. He then shouted loudly and slapped his hands on the dragon's shore. It was no wonder that Zhu Qizhen was so excited. If it was a small Jiaoji in the past, he would not take it seriously. However, ever since his defeat at the Battle of Temu, he had not had a peaceful time. He had walked step by step. To be able to persevere until now, he felt somewhat tired. After enduring for so long, he finally saw hope. How could he not be excited? How could he not be excited? Zhu Qizhen was truly happy. The king of Min was able to gain power with the help of the Jiaoji army. Why couldn't he gain their help to defeat the enemy? Once the king of Min's army was defeated, the southern Ming would take back Guangdong, Guangxi, and Yunnan. Not only that, he had also gained the friendship of Jiaoji. When the time came, he could ask them to send troops to help him deal with the Baiming king of Yu, Zhu Qiyu. It would not be impossible for him to unify the great Ming. When Zhu Qizhen thought about how he finally saw the hope of unifying the great Ming dynasty, he wanted to cry. In the past 2 years, he rarely had a good night's sleep. Most of the time, he had nightmares. Now that he could finally get rid of all of this, it was a wonderful feeling. Zhu Qizhen's cheerful appearance was seen by Lu De. On the surface, he also had a smile on his face, as if he was happy for the emperor, but in his heart, he was thinking about how to use this opportunity to deal with Yang Chendong. Putting aside the fact that he had been in conflict with Yang Chendong because of the Hangzhou prefectural magistrate, when Yang Chendong had asked for the throne, even when Zhu Qizhen had agreed to it, he had taken the initiative to step forward and come up with a plan. He had used the reason that he needed to inform the emperor of Baiming to ruin the plan. From this point alone, the conflict between the two sides was irreconcilable. A while ago, he heard that the mercenaries had actually killed their way through the Langsun region and reached the hinterland of Jiaoji. No one was more worried than him. Lu De was truly afraid that Yang Chendong was too powerful. If that was the case, he would be able to cause trouble for him at any time. Just as he was anxious and hesitant, even Lu De was thinking about whether he should send someone to contact Yang Chendong privately and take the initiative to submit to him in order to ensure his safety in the future. The Jiaoji diplomatic group appeared at the right time. After forgiving them for 2 or 3 days, they completely submitted to him. This gave Lu De hope that the matter could be resolved. Now that he saw how happy Zhu Qizhen was, he rolled his eyes and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, Jiaoji is willing to submit to you and is willing to help your Majesty send troops to quell the rebellion. However, there is a prerequisite for all of this. That is, the Duke of Loyalty has to disband the mercenaries. However, there's a saying since ancient times that when a general is away, military orders cannot be given. Will he agree? After hearing this, Zhu Qizhen's eyes flashed with anger. He was the current emperor. His words were the imperial edict. If anyone disobeyed, it would be considered as disobeying the imperial edict. Who would dare to disobey the imperial edict? Of course, this anger was only a flash. Even Zhu Qizhen himself knew that his so-called authority as the emperor was naturally an extraordinary existence in the eyes of other officials, but it might not really have any effect on Yang Chendong. Didn't he previously order the Duke of Loyalty, who had resolved the rebellion in Guangdong, to disband the mercenaries and return to the capital? However, the other party still didn't agree. Not to mention Jiaoji, which was thousands of li away, had the qualifications to disobey the imperial edict. If Yang Chendong disobeyed his imperial edict, wouldn't his reputation as the emperor be tarnished if word got out? If that really happened, Jiaoji wouldn't seek him out even if they had to admit defeat. The favorable situation would be lost in an instant. Zhu Qizhen felt a headache coming on. But no matter what, he was still an emperor. Even if Zhu Qizhen didn't have the confidence, he couldn't show weakness in front of an official. So he only said ambiguously, "Beloved official Lu is right. The Duke of Zhongdan is currently fighting a bloody battle in Jiaoji. We also don't know what the situation is like there. If the imperial edict delayed something important, wouldn't it be our fault?" He wasn't confident at all. However, he made it sound so dignified. Otherwise, how could he be the emperor? The word official could be said in any way. Although he understood this, Lu definitely wouldn't expose him. This was a slap to the emperor's face. Unless he didn't want to live anymore, he definitely wouldn't do it. Not only that, he also pretended to be very understanding. Your Majesty is wise. The Duke of Loyalty's situation isn't something we can know about immediately. Perhaps he's facing some difficulties. Seeing Luda on the right track, Zhu Qizhen was naturally very happy. He hurriedly nodded and said, "Yes, yes. Beloved official Lu is still the one who understands us." That's right. Does the Jiaoji diplomatic corps have any other explanation? Clearly, Zhu Qizhen was trying to think of another way by asking this question. After all, he couldn't guarantee that the imperial edict would be able to persuade Yang Chendong. He wanted to think of a solution from the weakened Jiaoji diplomatic corps. Luda understood Zhu Qizhen's intentions and had a troubled expression. "I'm afraid that won't work. If the Duke of Loyalty doesn't withdraw his troops, Jiaoji can't even take care of itself. How can they help us?" "Is that so?" "That's true." Zhu Qizhen nodded and didn't say anything else. Luda, who was standing below, was secretly discussing Zhu Qizhen's fantasy. He didn't have 100% confidence in making Yang Chendong withdraw his troops from Jiaoji. Yet, he still wanted Jiaoji to send troops to help him deal with the rebellious Min royal lineage. He wanted to take all the good things in the world. How could that be possible? Not to mention that Luda really didn't have any way to persuade the Jiaoji army. Even if he did, he wouldn't help. He couldn't wait for Yang Chendong to be unlucky. Now that he had finally found an opportunity, how could he take the initiative to retreat? As the saying goes, one should take action when one should. Seeing Zhu Qizhen hesitate, Luda hardened his heart and decided to add fuel to the fire. However, if he did so, the hatred between him and Yang Chendong would be irreconcilable. But unless that was the case, he would have to lower his head to Yang Chendong. For Luda, the Minister of Rights, to lower his head to a junior was too embarrassing. That would be no different from killing him. After making the decision to offend Yang Chendong to the end, Luda saw Zhu Qizhen's silence and spoke again. "Your Majesty, it's actually not impossible to persuade the Duke of Loyalty." Zhu Qizhen was still thinking about how to use the current situation to obtain the best advantage for himself when he suddenly heard Luda's words. "Beloved official Lu, you say you have a way? What is it?" "Your Majesty, there is a way. However, if we do this, it will inevitably draw the displeasure of the Duke of Loyalty. However, Compared to resolving the king of Min's rebellion and restoring the southern Ming Empire's clarity, one person's honor and disgrace are nothing. In short, we will have to ask your majesty to make a decision. Lu De didn't directly state the method. Instead, he had a troubled expression on his face. He wanted to do his best to distance himself from the matter. Zhu Qijin didn't think so much. He only wanted to solve the problem. Thus, he looked at Lu De with an urging expression. Beloved official Lu, if you have an idea, just say it. Whether it will work or not, we will make the decision. Yes. Lu De hurriedly agreed and then said, Your Majesty, from what this official knows, the Duke of Loyalty has an extremely good relationship with his fourth brother. This person is now in Fujian's Jiangning Prefecture. If we can persuade this person, I think the Duke of Loyalty will have to withdraw his troops for the sake of kinship. However, in this way, it is inevitable that he will have resentment. Lu De didn't say much after that. He believed that Zhu Qijin must have understood his hint. To put it bluntly, it was to use Yang Qindong's fourth brother as a hostage to blackmail him. Although this method was not open and above board compared to getting everything, it was worth it. Zhu Qijin did understand Lu De's meaning, but he didn't immediately make a decision. Of course, he knew that once he did so, it was tantamount to offending Yang Qindong to death. Yang Qindong was not an outsider. If it were any other of his subjects, Zhu Qijin would not even hesitate to issue an edict to arrest the person immediately. However, Yang Qindong now had a large number of troops in his hands. If he really pushed him to the edge and pushed him to the king of Min's side, wouldn't the loss outweigh the gain? Wouldn't he be shooting himself in the foot? If he couldn't achieve his goal after being the bad guy, then he would be asking for trouble. Chapter 505. This is a relationship between the Duke of Zhongdong and his fourth brother really that good? Zhu Qijin, who couldn't make a decision immediately, asked tentatively. This subject has done my research. The Duke of Zhongdong's fourth brother, Yang, is the only person who will follow the Duke of Zhongdong back to the ancestral home to pay respects. If their relationship isn't good, I'm afraid they won't go together. This subject also heard that Yang was originally going to follow the Duke of Zhongdong and was allowed to. However, for some reason, he was left behind. This should be for his safety. Since this is the case, it can be used to prove that the relationship between the two brothers is really good. Is there such a thing? Zhu Qijin sat on the high seat and stared at Lu De. If it was just a casual suggestion from Lu De, he would have thought that it was just a casual suggestion. However, now that he heard that Lu De had investigated this matter so deeply, only a fool would believe that it was all an accident. There was only one answer. Lu De had been planning for this for a long time. When he thought of the various conflicts between Lu De and Yang Qindong, Zhu Qijin understood that Lu De wanted to use his hand to stop Yang Qindong from becoming powerful. The officials would often play some battles and schemes with each other. As the emperor, there were many things that he was well aware of. However, sometimes he would stop them or even expose them. However, sometimes he would act as if nothing had happened. Whatever decision the emperor made, it all depended on whether the goal of the struggle between the officials was beneficial to the emperor's power. Zhu Qijin saw through Lu De's thoughts, but he didn't have the intention to expose it. He also didn't want to see Yang Qindong becoming powerful. Since Lu De's attitude and goal were the same as his, why not do it in passing? After thinking it through, Zhu Qijin nodded. Beloved official Lu is right. Since this is the case, this subject will send the embroidered uniform guards to Jiangning Prefecture to invite that person called Yang to the capital. After the matter is settled, we will issue a decree to Duke of Zhongdong. No matter what, Jiaoji is still one of the vassal states of our great Ming. It is one of the states that Taizu ordered not to invade. Even if they are willing to give up their title of Anan and return to the embrace of our great Ming, we should accept them with a benevolent heart. Zhu Qijin finally made up his mind. Lu De breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he had a new worry. After this matter was done, once the news spread, he was afraid that the other party would hate him to the bone. Unless Yang Qindong was suppressed by the great Ming Empire in the future, Once the great Ming Empire's power rose, it might be Yang Chendong's bad luck. As for whether or not the news would spread, not long after Lu Digang walked out of the imperial palace, under Zhu Qizhen's indication, the head eunuch Chao Jixiang spread news. As soon as Lu De returned to his residence, his subordinates told him the news that had just spread from the imperial palace, causing him to almost spit out a mouthful of blood. His expression was extremely ugly as he looked in the direction of the imperial palace. Lu De could not help but curse in his heart. "Your Majesty, even if you want to burn the bridge after crossing the river, you shouldn't be so quick to do it. It seems that in the future, if there is him, there will be no Yang Chendong. If there is Yang Chendong, there will be no him." In Nanjing City, the matter of how to deal with Jiaoji was still slowly being discussed, and the relevant matters were also slowly progressing. In front of the capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi City, arrows were already drawn and bows were drawn. A great battle was about to break out. Banners fluttered in the wind, war drums thundered, and a dark mass of soldiers stood at the foot of the city. Killing intent swept through the heavens and the earth, causing those who were brave to tremble uncontrollably. The moment the sky brightened, in front of the east gate of Hanoi City, the two armies stood in formation on the vast land. 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers dressed in plain clothes and gray armor stood in dozens of square formations. The square formations, with their banners fluttering high in the air, looked even more majestic and majestic. On the other side, 2,800 mercenaries dressed in camouflage uniforms stood in 2 rows in a long snake formation. Their advanced firearms and steel knives were all drawn, giving off a killing intent. The difference was that the mercenaries did not raise any banners. This was also Yang Chendong's idea. Before he confirmed his position, he did not plan on letting his mercenaries raise any banners. It was precisely because there were no flags flying that the nearly 3,000 mercenaries looked like a huge green snake hibernating there from afar. They seemed to be moving, yet they were still, causing others to not dare to underestimate them. Just in terms of numbers, the Jiaoji army appeared more imposing, not to mention the 20 large catapults that had been set up at the back of the formation. These catapults could throw boulders weighing almost 100 kilograms into the air. The furthest they could reach was more than 500 meters. They could be said to be the cold weapon with the longest range. Behind them were the catapults that could attack from afar. At the front of the formation was a 1,000-men iron shield formation. With these, they could block the enemy's firearms. With sufficient preparation, General Ruan Gungwang's face was filled with confidence. The war horn had been blown, but Ruan Gungwang did not immediately give the order to attack. Instead, he turned his head to look at the top of the Hanoi city wall. When he saw Crown Prince Li Yuanlong and the others standing there and looking down, he felt the blood in his body flowing quickly. He was so excited that he pulled out the sword at his waist, pointed it forward, and shouted, "Advance! Advance!" The 1,000-man iron shield formation at the very front quickly changed its formation from a square to a horizontal line. Soon, it formed a huge dragon, walking at the very front of the formation. Normal shields were made of wood and iron. In the cold weapon era, they could defend against bows and arrows, but not bullets. A pure iron shield would be able to defend against long-range bullets, but it would have a lot of flaws. Even if they were raised for a short period of time, they would consume a lot of energy. Moreover, they would be inflexible and difficult to move with the army. Despite knowing these flaws and advantages, Ruan Gungwang had no choice but to rely on them. In the first place, he didn't intend to use these shields to attack. He only needed them to protect his soldiers as they continued to advance. When they reached the range where they could start charging, he didn't believe that the enemy's muskets would be able to kill many people if 20,000 of them pressed forward at once. Under Ruan Gungwang's orders, the 1,000 iron shield soldiers moved forward slowly. The other 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers hid behind them. Several square formations merged into one and moved forward slowly. Advance! 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 With every step the army took, An earth-shattering shout could be heard. It was quite impressive and gave people a sense of awe. Damn, looks like these are elite soldiers. Company Commander Tian Su, who had received the mission of being the first to attack, could not help but snort when he saw the enemy 3 miles away, slowly moving towards him. Those who could become members of the Cold Vanguard were all proud. Those who could become a company commander were even more proud. It was rare for him to take anyone seriously. Now, the Jiaoji army was actually moving forward as though there was no one around them. In Tian Su's eyes, this was a form of provocation. If it were not for the fact that they were 1,000 meters away, he would have taught them a lesson with a 9-5 style. The Jiaoji army was still moving forward. The word advance kept coming out of their mouths. Gradually, they reached a peak. They were like a volcano that could erupt at any time. Once it reached a certain temperature, it would come rolling in. In comparison, the 7 battalions of the Cold Vanguard stood motionless on the ground. They were like huge rocks that were fixed to the ground. They were not affected by the wind and rain at all. Ha, did you see that? The enemy is afraid. Ruan Gengwang, who was riding on his horse, laughed out loud when he saw that the mercenaries were still motionless even though they had already moved 500 meters forward. In his opinion, the mercenaries were only motionless because they couldn't do anything. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stared intently at the scene in front of him from the top of the Hanoi City Tower behind him. Although the troops were already far away and he could no longer see clearly, he could still clearly see that the mercenaries were not moving. Seeing that his army was moving forward and the enemy was not moving at all, he could not help but ask the generals beside him, "Generals, what do you think the mercenaries are doing?" The one standing closest to Li Yuanlong was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. Compared to the other generals who were all smiling, his expression was more serious. When he heard the Crown Prince's question, he replied naturally, "The enemy is clearly using inaction to counter the enemy. To be honest, this kind of steadiness is something that our army cannot achieve." Just as Fan Yuhai finished speaking, another general, Li Xiaozhong, could not help but say, "General Fan, why do you have to raise the morale of others and lower your own? It is obvious that the mercenaries are scared by our army and do not dare to move." Li Xiaozhong was a member of the Li clan. Now that the Li clan was powerful in Jiaoji, his status as a general had also risen. When Fan Yuhai heard Li Xiaozhong's words, he did not try to argue with him. The generals on the battlefield were not like those civil officials who cared about words. They cared more about results. Before the results were out, it was hard to tell who was right and who was wrong. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong also did not say anything. Instead, he stared at everything in front of him with interest. He wanted to see how the powerful mercenaries would deal with the Jiaoji army that outnumbered them by several times. At the front of the battlefield, the distance between the two sides was rapidly shrinking. From the initial 3 li, it was now less than 700 meters. Even so, the word advance was still echoing in the air. The Jiaoji army's momentum was getting stronger and stronger. "Prepare your grenades. Shield my ass. In a moment, I will let them know what it means to lift a rock and smash it on their own feet." Facing the approaching enemy, Tian Su did not show a trace of fear. On the contrary, he gave an unquestionable military order to the soldiers below. Then he took down the 95 style from his body and stood in a standing position, ready to shoot. Chapter 506. Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin was in the middle of the troops. Seeing the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers closing in, his expression did not change. If one looked closely, one could see a trace of disapproval in his eyes. It wasn't because Kong Chuanxin was careless. Before he came, Yang Shindong had talked to him and told him about the iron shield that was being built in Hanoi City. This was all thanks to the Security Bureau. After being injected with large amounts of gold and silver, the Security Bureau had developed so quickly that they had already infiltrated the countries that they were pretending to be enemies with. Once there was any movement, they would immediately spread the news so that the main force of the mercenaries could make the most accurate decision. As someone who came later, no one knew better than him the importance of intelligence. Later on, people said that victory in a war depended on the source of military intelligence. Some people even said that 70% intelligence and 30% battle. This showed the importance of military intelligence to an army. It was because he was prepared that Yang Qindong told Kong Xuanxin about the Jiaoji army building the iron chariots when Kong Xuanxin was about to lead the army into battle. Not only that, he also came up with a countermeasure. The advantage of the steel shields was their sturdiness. They could indeed effectively block flying bullets. However, their weaknesses were even more obvious. For example, they were slow and inflexible. With these shortcomings, it was naturally very easy to deal with them. All they needed to do was throw a series of grenades, and it would be like a heavenly maiden scattering flowers. In this way, unless the place was very narrow, facing the fragments of the explosion in all directions, even an iron shield would be useless. As for the steel chariots, regardless of whether it was a rocket launcher or a 4-0 flame, they would all be easy targets. Thinking about the battlefield in the future, even mobile tanks were afraid of rocket launchers, not to mention the clumsy steel chariots that relied on their legs to move. Kong Xuanxin, who had received the news ahead of time, didn't show the slightest hint of panic when he saw Iron Shield approaching him step by step. The only thing he was worried about now was whether Tian Su could keep the situation under control. After all, there was a limit to how far a grenade could be thrown. Whether or not the mercenaries at the front could withstand the pressure from the Jiaoji army and strike at the most appropriate time was the most important factor in this first battle. Tian Su was the company commander of Company 1 and was the subordinate that battalion commander Kong Xuanxin valued the most. As the mercenary group continued to expand, the number of mid-level officers needed also increased. Promoting new recruits was something that Yang Qindong had always advocated. Under what circumstances would one be able to tell if a person's military talent was worthy of being entrusted with important tasks? Without a doubt, war was the best battlefield and way to test a commander. Kong Xuanxin wanted to test the ability of the company commander of Heavenly Strategies, so he didn't say a word from beginning to end. He just watched everything from the perspective of a bystander. Of course, if heavenly policy was really useless, then the second company commander, third company commander, and fourth company commander could replace him at any time. This was also something Kong Xuanxin had prepared behind the back of the heavenly policy. He believed that even if the company commander of Heavenly Strategies found out about this, he wouldn't be dissatisfied. After all, the situation on a battlefield was always ever-changing. A commander who didn't leave any room for maneuver was the most unprofessional. How would the company commander of Heavenly Strategies know about this? After ordering a company of subordinates and a battalion of auxiliary soldiers to prepare grenades, he raised his Type 95 and fired a shot at the Jiaoji soldiers in front of him. Bah! The sound of the gunshot was extremely crisp. The bullet flew out of the barrel of the gun and hit a Jiaoji soldier's shield according to Heavenly Strategies' plan. Under the sound of the iron weapons colliding, an even more crisp sound of collision was produced. When the gunshot rang out, Ruan Gongwang's eyes widened. His expression was somewhat unnatural. Although the Crown Prince had said that these shields were made of pure metal and that firearms shouldn't be able to penetrate them, he still lacked confidence because he hadn't tested it before. When the gunshot rang out, his entire body tensed up. All of this lasted until the bullet hit the metal shield and produced a spark. Only then did he heave a huge sigh of relief. Then he pointed to the front with a smile and said to his subordinates, "Do you see that? The opponent's firearms are useless against us." Ha ha! The group of subordinates also laughed loudly, as if they were in agreement. Previously, they were indeed a little nervous. Although they took the initiative to attack, their morale was astonishing. However, before they encountered firearms, they really didn't have confidence in their hearts. Now it was all good. The truth allowed them to relax. Not only the generals, but the soldiers below Yesen were also frightened by this shot. However, when they saw that the troops in front of them didn't show any signs of chaos or uneasiness, These people also let go of their courage. When they shouted the word advance, their voices were much louder and their speed was much faster. As expected, it's made of pure metal. Amazing! After firing the shot, Heavenly Strategies retracted the Type 95 and shook his head. Although he looked a little disappointed, he wasn't afraid at all. Obviously, this result was within his expectations. The two troops were still closing in on each other rapidly. 400 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters. As they got closer and closer, both troops could clearly see each other's formation. A tense atmosphere began to spread. The emotions of war and killing were quickly condensed and focused. 150 meters, 130 meters, 100 meters at such a distance. Both sides could already see each other's figures and appearances. The archers of the Jiaoji army, who were hiding behind the metal shields, also prepared to fire their arrows. There were a total of 2,000 archers. One could imagine that if they didn't stop them, arrows would rain down from the sky. Comrades, charge for 30 meters. Drop the bombs and shoot. His gaze was fixed on the enemy's every move. When he saw that the enemy was about to make the first move, Heavenly Strategies, who had been lazing around all this while, seemed to have changed into a different person. He suddenly roared and led the troops to charge forward. Heavenly Strategies' actions also led the soldiers beside him to charge forward as fast as they could. The Cold Vanguard Company and the Auxiliary Battalion, a total of 500 people, charged forward like arrows released from a bow. To the soldiers who had to run 25 kilometers in a day's training, the 30-meter distance was a sprint. In just a few seconds, they had crossed the required distance. Then, 500 grenades were tossed forward like rain. Under the 30-meter standing run, the flying speed of the grenades was much further than before. Basically, each grenade was thrown a distance of more than 60 meters. Under such superposition, the distance of 100 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Before the Jiaoji army could react, including the 2,000 archers, they had just knocked their bows. Before they could release their arrows, the grenades that filled the sky rained down on their heads. What the hell is this? Many of the Jiaoji army instinctively had this question in their minds. However, just as this thought formed in their minds, the grenades that were thrown at them had already exploded above their heads, beside them, and under their feet. Boom, boom, boom. The ground trembled and shrapnel flew everywhere. Flames rose and smoke lingered in the air. Following these sudden changes, the formation of the 1,000 iron shield bearers at the front of the Jiaoji army finally loosened. These iron shield bearers were originally holding heavy shields. After walking for nearly 3 miles, they were already exhausted. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and shockwave around them. It was mainly due to the various fragments attacking them. They were completely unprepared and were struck dumb in an instant. They only wanted to defend against the firearms in front of them. They did not expect such powerful explosives to suddenly explode beside them. The iron shield bearers, who seemed to have the tightest defense, were the first to collapse. The 2,000 archers who stood behind them in the second row also fell into chaos. The advantage of archers was that they could kill their enemies from a long distance. However, their disadvantage was also very obvious. Once they lost their protective barrier, their chest would be completely exposed to the enemy. There was no way to defend themselves at all. Needless to say, the explosions of the grenades were right above their heads. Who knew how many archers were killed or maimed by the power of the grenades? After a row of iron shield bearers and 2 rows of archers were defeated, the entire Jiaoji army was in chaos. Surrounded by explosions and smoke, they did not even know what to do next. The Jiaoji army was stunned, and their formation was in chaos. The mercenaries didn't panic. After throwing out the grenades, they started shooting with their guns. 500 people against 20,000 enemies. There was no need for them to aim. All they needed to do was to adjust the Type 95 and Type 81 assault rifles into continuous firing mode. Bullets continued to spray out from the muzzles of the guns, shooting towards the Jiaoji soldiers opposite them. Every time the machine guns fired, a group of Jiaoji army would fall to the ground. They did not understand the situation and did not know what was going on. Many of them fell to the ground with unknown emotions. Some of the Jiaoji army soldiers who were lucky enough not to be hit by the bullets turned around and ran. When people encounter danger, they will have an instinct. This instinct is to turn around and run away. Unless there was something even more terrifying happening behind them, they would run until they could not run anymore. Chapter 507. The initial moment was terrifying. There is nothing more pitiful than a group of panicking, defeated soldiers. They scrambled to retreat. They shouted and ran, and many of them fell down. The Jiaoji soldiers who were shot didn't know what they were doing. They just instinctively retreated to the open city gate behind them. General Ruan was in the middle of the army. Riding on a horse, he could see further than ordinary people. Naturally, he knew what had happened. The sudden explosion of the grenade was beyond his expectations. He had a bad feeling when he saw a large number of Iron Shield soldiers fall to the ground. However, before he could give the order, the entire army fell into chaos. "Hold on. Charge forward. They have fewer people than us. As long as we charge forward, we can win," he shouted as he swung his sword at the retreating soldiers. He wanted to use this method to stop the army from retreating. However, under the fear of death, how many people would listen to his words? How many people would listen to him? But how many people would listen to it and take it to heart? The tide of retreating soldiers couldn't be stopped. Even though Ruan had killed 4 to 5 retreating Jiaoji soldiers, he couldn't reverse the situation. Not only that, Ruan, who was swinging his sword, became Tian's target. Riding on a horse and being higher than everyone else was a privilege of a general. However, at the same time, it was inevitable that he would become a conspicuous target. Tiansu targeted him. He held the 95 style firmly with both hands and raised the gun in a half-kneeling position. He adjusted his breathing and aimed between 3 points and 1 line. His finger gently touched the trigger of the gun. Then his shoulder shook. That was the recoil of the bullet. Bang! Bang! In the chaos, no one paid attention to the 2 gunshots. However, after the first gunshot missed the target, the second gunshot hit the target. Ruan, who was still swinging his sword and yelling at the retreating soldiers, felt a pain in his chest. Then, his breathing became hurried. His body swayed a little on the horse before he lost the strength to hold on to it and fell from the horse. Once a person fell, the consequences would be very serious. Ruan, who had been shot, would not have died immediately. However, when he fell to the ground, countless feet stepped on his body. Not only did he not have a single breath left, but his entire face had also changed. At that moment, he was completely trampled to death. When Ruan fell off his horse and died, it meant that the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers had completely retreated. Without anyone stopping them, the Jiaoji soldiers were running wildly. Less than 100 meters behind them, 500 mercenaries with guns were chasing after them, killing the last few Jiaoji soldiers who were running away. This seemed to have become a death sentence. The speed of the fleeing soldiers chasing after Qiu Jiaoji became slower and slower. They were all afraid that if they were too slow, they would fall behind and be killed. Because of this, stampedes occurred from time to time. No matter who it was, once they lost their balance and fell to the ground, they would not be able to escape the tragic fate of being trampled to death. Behind the Heavenly Strategies Company commander, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin saw that the overall situation was settled and immediately shouted to the 3 trumpeters who had been waiting for a long time, "Blow the bugle! Everyone attack!" Beep, 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 beep. The loud and refreshing bugle call sounded. Over 3,000 mercenaries gave a shout and charged forward. They maintained a platoon formation and tried their best to charge forward as fast as possible. The situation in front of them seemed to be telling them that if they were late by 1 step, who knew how many military merits they would lose. Compared to the full charge of the mercenaries, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong staggered on the city tower of Hanoi City. If it were not for the captain of the guards who supported him, he would have fallen to the ground. Defeated. Li Yuanlong had just stabilized himself when he muttered to himself, "Defeated, defeated. Your Highness, please close the city gates immediately." General Fan Yuhai's expression was also very ugly. Fortunately, he had led troops for many years and was not as weak as the Crown Prince. "I agree." The other general, Huang Hua, also cupped his fist and said with his head lowered. Clearly, he could see that if this continued, the defeated Ruangunwang's troops would very likely attract the mercenaries into the city. Hearing the two generals express the same opinion, Li Yuanlong's face flashed with a hint of struggle. However, he quickly made a decision. He gritted his teeth and said, "Pass down this crown prince's order, close the city gates." With this order, it meant that the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers outside the city had completely given up. Ruangunwang was dead, and his subordinates were running like headless flies. They only hoped to enter Hanoi City as soon as possible and save their lives. However, what they saw next was the scene of the eastern city gate closing from the inside. Unpleasant creaking sounds came from the thick and heavy city gate as it rapidly closed. No, seeing that their only escape route was about to be sealed. At least 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers' eyes turned red. Some people's eyes were filled with despair. Some people ran faster, hoping to rush into the city at the last moment. There were also people who ran towards the empty trebuchet. Then, everyone worked together to change the direction of the heavy trebuchet. Since they have already abandoned us, then don't blame us for using our own methods to fight back. A somewhat famous Chiliarch yelled and ordered the soldiers under him to put the huge rocks into the trebuchet. The trebuchet began to bombard Hanoi City behind them. As he bombarded the trebuchet, the Chiliarch yelled to the approaching mercenaries, "We surrender. We are willing to help you take down Hanoi City and atone for our crimes." With this yell, many Jiaoji soldiers quickly responded. In order to live, they had to show a stance. "Stop firing." Company Commander Tian Su, who had already reloaded his fourth magazine, saw the change in the situation and immediately stopped the advancing mercenaries. Originally, he wanted to follow behind the Jiaoji soldiers into Hanoi City. This was also the military order he made in front of Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. However, when he saw the city gates close in advance, he became anxious. Although he still had a backup plan, it was still more troublesome. However, when he saw the sudden change in front of him, he suddenly had an idea. Why not use these defeated soldiers to help him take down the city? The 400 people beside him were all treasures. It would be best if he could save one of them. After making up his mind, Tianse followed the situation and yelled, "Any Jiaoji soldiers who help the mercenaries take down the city will be atoned for their crimes and will not be killed. Anyone who still wants to resist will be killed without mercy." The 400 soldiers who were stopped by Tianse didn't understand what he was planning. However, when they heard his yell, they all understood. In the following moment, they all followed Tianse's lead and yelled, "Kill without mercy." Attacking was atoning for their crimes and atoning for their crimes. The Jiaoji soldiers who were already at their wits' end saw a sliver of opportunity before their deaths. How could they not grasp it with all their might? One by one, they ran to the catapults and began to help take down Hanoi City's city gate tower. These catapults were used to prevent the mercenaries from attacking. They were placed very close to Hanoi City's city gate tower, less than 50 meters away. Now that they were being used as tools to take down the city gates, one could imagine how big of a threat they were. When a random boulder was thrown, it actually flew over the city gate tower and landed in Hanoi City. Just this boulder alone was enough to harm countless innocent people in the city. Bastards, bastards, release the arrows and kill them. Seeing these defeated soldiers helping the mercenaries against him, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's expression turned ugly as he yelled at the top of his lungs. The Crown Prince had given the order. Although he knew that the people below were soldiers of his own country, seeing them throw boulders into the city and injure countless people, Fan Yuhai, Huang Hua, and the other generals gritted their teeth and ordered fiercely, "Fire the arrows." After a few breaths, arrows rained down. For a moment, the battle outside the city was very lively. On the contrary, Commander Tian, Su, and the others who were following behind became less anxious. "Commander, should we lend a hand?" A platoon leader of the Lung Feng platoon couldn't help but ask when he saw the Jiaoji soldiers fighting with their own people so fiercely. "There's no need to hurry. Let's wait until their morale is low before we make a move." Not only did Tianzi speak unhurriedly, he even sat down on the ground to take a good rest during the battle. With Commander Tianzi taking the lead, the other 500 mercenaries also sat down on the ground. Each of them hugged their guns and looked at the lively scene 200 meters away, occasionally pointing at it. By the time Battalion Commander Kong Xuanxin arrived with his main force, this was the scene that greeted him. However, Kong Xuanxin didn't have any intention of reprimanding Tian Su. Perhaps he had the same thought. Therefore, he ordered his troops to take advantage of this time to take a good rest while calling someone to call Tian Su over. "That battle just now was pretty good. You showed the might of the Lung Feng platoon. What do you plan to do next?" Kong Xuanxin asked as he pointed at the flat ground beside him, indicating that Tian Su could sit down. Of course, Kong Xuanxin knew what to do. However, he still asked because he wanted to test Tian Su. As the mercenary army continued to grow, the ranks and structure of the troops also increased. It was only a matter of time before someone like him, who had military achievements and experience, rose to the top. However, if he wanted to secure a high position, it would depend on whether he had capable subordinates. Clearly, at this moment, he was nurturing Tian Su as a trusted aide. Chapter 508. In front of Kong Xuanxin, Tian Su wasn't that restrained. After all, Kong Xuanxin was his squad leader when he first joined Lung Feng. When he became a squad leader, Kong Xuanxin was also his platoon leader. Along the way, he had a battalion commander and a company commander. Battalion commander, what I mean is that we should wait until they've exhausted most of their forces. Once they're tired, we'll blast open the east gate and take the opportunity to charge in. Tianzi said casually. This was part of the battle plan from before. During the meeting yesterday, Kong Xuanxin had said that if it was possible, they should attack Hanoi City today. If the conditions weren't right, then they would wait for the right opportunity. Although that was what he said, everyone who attended the meeting knew that the battalion commander was going to make a decision to make a great contribution. Unless the conditions were really unsuitable, the invasion of Hanoi City today was a fact that was set in stone. Aren't we being a little too hasty? Kong Xuanxin asked worriedly after hearing Tian Su's reply. According to the intelligence, there are 80,000 Jiaoji soldiers in the city. In addition, there are many high-ranking officials and nobles in the city. I'm afraid there are at least 10,000 of them in total. If we include the conscripts in the city, then there will be 100,000 soldiers. Even though we can eliminate 20,000 of them, there will still be a lot left. Attacking a country's capital with less than 3,000 people? Moreover, the enemy had already made some preparations for defense. Such a thing sounded like a joke. However, it was a completely different story when the same thing happened to the mercenaries. With their excellent military quality, excellent physical fitness, and most importantly, excellent weapons and equipment, it was normal for them to win a battle with a small number of people. Therefore, Kong Xuanxin wasn't worried about whether they could attack the city. Instead, he was worried about whether they could gain a foothold after entering the city. If they went in first and were chased out, then it would be really embarrassing. When the sixth young master arrived with the main force of the army, wouldn't they be too ashamed to meet him? Tianzi naturally understood this as well. Therefore, he nodded in agreement. Then, he said, "Battalion commander, riches and honor are found in danger. This time, you finally have the opportunity to lead the team alone. It will be a pity if you don't fight for it." Moreover, once they suddenly entered the city, the Jiaoji soldiers would definitely not be on guard, and the good stuff would not be transferred too much. That was a large batch of spoils of war. How much merit would that be? Presumably, the sixth young master would be very satisfied when he saw it. As for what will happen after we enter the city, we can just take it slow and steady. If it doesn't work, we can just burn down all the dangerous buildings in front of us. As long as the Jiaoji soldiers can't get close to us, they can't do anything to us. When the time comes, it will be time for us to use our guns to kill them one by one. Burn houses? Are you going to burn down the houses too? Hearing this idea, Kong Chuanxin's eyes lit up. However, when he thought about how the sixth young master often said that he wanted to get along well with the people, he couldn't help but hesitate. Seeing Kong Chuanxin's worry, Tian Su chuckled and said, "Battalion commander, the sixth young master is a kind person. It makes sense for him to advocate for unity and building good relations with the people. However, we're not facing the Han people, but the people of Jiaoji. Perhaps there are kind people among them, but most of them are still hostile to us. Moreover, a general's success is built on 10,000 years of withered bones. At this time, we can't have the slightest bit of kindness. Otherwise, we will be harming our own brothers." Tian Su's words were very reasonable. On the battlefield, only victory mattered. Only by winning would they be able to gain the initiative. Even if you want to benefit the people, Yesen has to have the final say. Otherwise, if you can't even protect your own life, how can you talk about protecting the interests of others? After hearing this, Kong Chuanxin finally made a decision. He wasn't an indecisive person to begin with. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the battalion commander of Lung Feng. All right, since that's the case, then let's rest for a while. When they're almost done fighting, we will make our move. All right, prepare the weapons to break the city gate. We will see your performance later. With Kong Chuanxin's order, Tian Su changed from his seat to a standing position. He gave a standard military salute and said, "Rest assured, battalion commander. We will complete our mission." Crown Prince Li Yuanlong didn't know what the mercenaries were going to do next. He had already retreated from the East City Tower. After all, the catapults didn't have eyes. Who knew when they would land on his head? If he was hit, wouldn't he die with no one to seek justice? Other than Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, there was also the famous General Fan Yuhai and another general surnamed Li Xiaozhong. After they followed the Crown Prince back to the palace, they discussed what to do next. "Your Highness, don't worry. Today's battle was all Ruan Gengwang's fault. He underestimated the enemy and advanced prematurely, which led to his defeat. As long as we defend the city gate, the mercenaries won't be able to gain any advantage with our advantage in numbers." Li Xiaozhong was the first to step forward. He was comforting the Crown Prince, but he was also expressing his opinion on this battle. That's right. The other generals nodded in agreement, seemingly agreeing with Li Xiaozhong's words. Who was a crown prince? Ruan Gengwang was the crown prince of a country. If nothing unexpected happened, he would be the future king. Nothing must happen to him. Even if something happened, it would be because his subordinates didn't understand the crown prince's intentions and didn't do a good job. If the battle was lost, someone had to be the scapegoat. Ruan Gengwang, who died on the battlefield, became the scapegoat. Although the crown prince Li Yuanlong couldn't bear it, he had to make this decision for the sake of the overall situation. All right, since everyone has the same opinion, then this matter is settled. However, in order to prevent any accidents from happening, we still need to mobilize the troops. General Fan, I'll have to trouble you with this matter. Li Yuanlong nodded helplessly and handed over the battle to the famous General Fan Yuhai. This general has received the order. Fan Yuhai cupped his fists and left the hall. There was no time to lose. For the sake of Hanoi's safety, some things couldn't be delayed and had to be done immediately. After Fan Yuhai left, Li Yuanlong discussed with the generals what to do next while waiting for news of the battle at the East Gate to end. At the East Gate, after the Crown Prince left, all battle matters were handed over to General Huanghua. General Huang wasn't in a hurry when he saw the huge rocks blocking the city. He first sent people to evacuate some of the commoners near the eastern city gate, while continuously ordering the archers to shoot down arrows from the top of the city gate tower. Compared to the cumbersome catapults, the archers were much more agile. In addition, they were on high ground, so they were unstoppable. In just an hour, they killed thousands of Jiaoji soldiers. They also threw down many rocks and wooden sleepers from below the city tower, destroying 10 catapults below. Without the catapults, the Jiaoji soldiers' attack power was completely weakened. They didn't even have many bows and arrows in their hands, so they became live targets with nowhere to hide. Seeing more and more of their brothers die, some of the Jiaoji soldiers turned around and ran toward the mercenaries. When they were 300 meters away, they threw down their weapons and knelt down to surrender. Everyone had the desire to live. Seeing that there was no way out, they could only turn around and beg for mercy. Although they were uneasy and didn't know how the mercenaries would deal with them, there was still some hope for them to try. It was much better than waiting outside the city as a target. Go to a camp of temporary auxiliary soldiers and confiscate their weapons. Tie them up with ropes. Camp Commander Kong Chuanxin waved his hand, and 400 temporary auxiliary soldiers rushed forward. They surrounded the Jiaoji soldiers who had already surrendered and lost their will to fight. Speaking of which, there were at least 7,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were still alive. The ratio of 400 people surrounding 7,000 people didn't seem to be harmonious. However, on the battlefield, such things happened frequently. When facing a group of defeated soldiers, especially those who had lost their will to fight, one only needed to pay a small price to detain them. It was just like when the Japanese army invaded China. 2 Japanese soldiers could detain 2,000 Chinese for tens of li. Thinking about it now, it didn't seem very possible. However, it did happen. It had to be said that when a nation lost their will to fight, it was very sad. After dealing with the 7,000 captives, Chang Tian Su also started to get busy. First, he organized the troops. Then, he called out the 10 soldiers from each platoon. Unlike the other soldiers of the Cold Front, these 10 soldiers, from the squad leader to the vice squad leader to the ordinary soldiers, each carried a large wooden box on their backs. Along the way, they had been switching to carry the boxes, and their speed was not much slower than the other comrades. When they were called out, each of them opened the wooden box skillfully. Then, 5 individual rocket launchers were assembled and placed in each of their hands. His gaze swept across the soldiers. When he saw that they were all filled with fighting spirit, Chang Tian nodded in satisfaction. He pointed at the east gate of Hanoi, a few hundred meters away, and said loudly, "Blast open that gate. Platoon 1 and 2 cover it. Platoon 3 and the auxiliary battalion will charge in when the gate is opened. Anyone who resists, kill without mercy." The order to attack the city was finally given by Chang Tian Su. A total of 500 mercenaries puffed out their chests and shouted in unison. They then turned around and began to move towards the east gate of Hanoi City in rows. On the east gate, General Huang Hua was commanding the soldiers to clean up the battlefield. Chapter 509. In the battle just now, there were still a few boulders that fell on top of the city tower, injuring some soldiers and destroying some city walls. If they weren't properly repaired, it would become a troublesome matter when facing an attack. While arranging for the city walls to be cleaned, Huang Hua ordered his men to fetch a large number of bows and arrows. They had wasted a lot of arrows from the previous battle, and now was the time to replenish them. "General, look, they are moving. It seems like they are heading towards us." A soldier in charge of observing the mercenaries shouted loudly, attracting the attention of everyone, including Huang Hua. "They are really coming." Following that, a Jiaoji soldier shouted loudly. It could be heard that there was a hint of fear in this shout. Huang Hua was also awakened by the shout. When he saw that the mercenaries were indeed moving towards the east gate, his expression changed drastically. He had always thought that after the previous wave of attacks, the mercenaries would know the difficulty of attacking the city. At the very least, there would be a period of respite before the main force of the enemy arrived. However, he did not expect that they would dare to launch another attack with less than 3,000 men. Are they tired of living? Don't they know that with the city walls as cover, it is impossible for them to charge up with just 3,000 men? Many thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. Although Huang Hua did not know what they would do, as a general, He instinctively ordered his soldiers to get into position and prepare to defend the city. He did not immediately send someone to inform the crown prince because he was still somewhat confident. With the sturdy city walls, they should be able to withstand the attacks of the mercenaries. Of course, he was more curious because he did not see any siege ladders in the enemy's hands. How were they going to attack the city? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly thought of how Wang was defeated. When he thought about the advanced weapons that could explode when thrown out, he felt his scalp go numb. He shouted to the Jiaoji soldiers beside him, "Archers, get ready. Don't let them get close to the city gates. Don't let them blow up the city gates. Also, send someone to inform the crown prince that we need reinforcements. The more, the better." Huang Hua's shouts caused the Jiaoji soldiers on the city walls to panic. Just when the mercenaries were 200 meters away from the city walls, the battlements were filled with archers. They knocked their arrows and prepared to shoot at the enemy at any moment. The archers were ready, but the mercenaries didn't do as they wished. They stopped when they were 130 meters away from the tower. In this position, the archers had no room to display their skills. Even if an arrow was shot, it wouldn't be able to reach that far. What were they doing? Seeing the mercenaries suddenly stop, all the Jiaoji soldiers on the tower widened their eyes. General Huang Hua, who was leading the team, had a bad premonition. However, he still couldn't figure out what the other party wanted to do. At a distance of 130 meters, Tian Su ordered the army to stop. Then, the 5 rocket launchers took another 5 steps forward. Then, 3 of them aimed at the city gate while 2 of them aimed at the city tower. It only took them a few seconds to do all this. From this point, it seemed like they had been training for a long time. They were fully prepared. The first squad leader was one of the 5 rocket launchers. Seeing that his comrades were ready, he first took a deep breath and stabilized his breathing. Then he began the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The moment the word 1 rang out, 5 cannonballs with flames flew out horizontally, whistling through the air and flying straight towards their respective targets. Boom, 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 boom. 5 deafening sounds rang out one after another, shocking everyone's eyes. Not only were the rocket launchers shocking, but their effects were also very shocking. The 2 rockets that were aimed at the city tower exploded in the crowd of Jiaoji soldiers. One of them was even close to General Huang Hua. The moment the explosion sounded, the powerful impact threw General Huang Hua to the ground. The 2 Jiaoji soldiers who were standing at the spot where the explosion hit were blown into pieces. There wasn't a single intact part of their bodies. They were completely obliterated. After the 3 rocket launchers that were aimed at the East City Gate exploded, the impact was even greater. They directly blew up half of the city gate, creating a 3 to 4 meter wide opening. People could easily pass through. Fire! The Tiansu Company commander, who was already prepared, was waiting for this scene. Seeing that the rocket launchers had completed their initial target, he shouted loudly. Then, he led the troops with the Type 95 and fired at the Jiaoji archers on the city tower who were still in a daze. At a distance of 130 meters, the archers couldn't do anything to the mercenaries. However, regardless of whether it was the Type 95 or the Type 81 assault rifle, they didn't take this distance seriously. The bullets in their barrels could easily land on the city tower, dealing a heavy blow to the Jiaoji soldiers who weren't mentally prepared. Even though the bullets weren't mass-produced and lost some accuracy, at least 50% of the bullets still hit the enemy. Even if the bullets didn't hit their targets, once they hit the battlements, the impact was still frightening. It was enough to force the Jiaoji soldiers to retreat, not daring to expose themselves in the air without any cover. The 1st and 2nd platoons of Lung Feng soldiers used the Type 95 to suppress the archers on the city tower. The 3 platoons of Lung Feng and a battalion of auxiliary soldiers used this opportunity to charge towards the ruined East City Gate. First, a few grenades were tossed out nearby. Not only did they blow up the entrance of the city gate, but they also scared off the Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to reinforce the city gate. Then, the 400 mercenaries advanced triumphantly. Taking advantage of this opportunity, to kill their way into the city. After Tian's side achieved victory, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin led the main force and rushed over. They entered one after another, stabilizing their advantage. On the city tower, Huang Hua, who was knocked down by the rocket launchers, stood up under the protection of a few bodyguards. When he looked down at the city, he could feel the blood in his heart spurting out. It's over, it's over, it's all over. He sat on the ground with a thump. With the city gate lost, as the general of the city defense, he had an undeniable responsibility. General, the mercenaries are coming up the city ladder. Let's kill our way out. One of the bodyguards saw that the Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to escape didn't go far down the city ladder before a series of gunshots rang out. Then they all ran back up the city tower. He guessed what had happened and suggested to Huang Hua. It's useless. We'll die if we kill our way out. Huang Hua shook his head dejectedly. He knew this crown prince too well. Ruan Genwang was the scapegoat for the previous failure. Then he would definitely be the scapegoat for the loss of the city gate. In this way, whether they killed their way out or not, they would still die. Seeing that the general had no intention of killing his way out, the bodyguard kindly reminded him, "General, why don't we surrender? Just now, the soldiers outside the city surrendered. They all survived." Surrender? Huang Hua shook his head and said decisively, "Our Jiaoji generals will only die standing, not kneel down to live. Come on, take out my broadsword and fight it out with those mercenaries. If I kill one, I'll break even. If I kill two, I'll make a profit." Under Huang Hua's command, the Jiaoji soldiers on the city tower seemed to have found their backbone. Then, the 1,000 men began to charge down the city ladder in an organized manner. They shouted and yelled, creating quite a commotion. However, the city ladder wasn't wide to begin with. As long as two Type 95 pistols took turns to guard it and fire continuously, no one would be able to charge down the 20-meter-long spiral city ladder. After only 2 waves of attacks and over 50 people died, the other soldiers couldn't take it anymore. This was clearly the rhythm of charging down to die. There wasn't any hope of survival. Who would be willing to do it? No one was willing to charge down. This angered Huang Hua. He used his big sword to kill a Jiaoji soldier who didn't listen to his orders. Then, he coldly looked at the other Jiaoji soldiers and said, "Since you've joined the army, fighting bloody battles on the battlefield is your destiny. Whoever dares to retreat, this person will be your example." Seeing the blood dripping down from the big sword, the Jiaoji soldiers became afraid. They had no choice but to charge again. Needless to say, under the muzzle of the Type 81 rifle, they left behind a bunch of corpses and retreated. At this moment, the shouts of the mercenaries could be heard from below the city tower. Those who surrender will be spared. Those who resist will be killed without mercy. Originally, there was no hope of survival. Everyone thought that since they were going to die anyway, they might as well charge out and die. However, now that there was a path of survival in front of them, everyone's thoughts became lively. However, at this moment, Huang Hua didn't care about all this. Seeing that another charge had failed, he still ordered the other Jiaoji soldiers to continue charging. He even said that even if they were to die, they should die on the way. It had to be said that Huang Hua was a brave general. However, it was a pity that sometimes a general's bravery wasn't enough to win a battle. Just like now, when everyone was in a dilemma, if you didn't want to encourage them and wanted to force them to die, who would listen to you? There were still a few centurions in the Jiaoji army. After they quickly exchanged glances, they brought their trusted aides and surrounded Huang Hua. "What are you guys doing?" Huang Hua's personal guards saw that the situation wasn't right. They shouted loudly, hoping to use their shouts to scare the enemy. If it was any other time, such shouts would definitely be effective. However, in the face of life and death, such shouts were clearly ineffective. The Jiaoji soldiers only hesitated for a moment before they began to surround them. Chapter 5:10. Since there were people who wanted them to die, in order to survive, they had no choice but to sacrifice themselves. Even though it seemed a little inappropriate to say these words, the truth was as such. The Jiaoji soldiers who wanted to live and surrender surrounded Huang Hua and his bodyguards. Then, someone stabbed the first sword. After a series of clashing sounds, Huang Hua died in battle. His body was thrown to the city stairs, and a white flag was hung high. The fall of Jiaoji's eastern city gate tower was completely out of Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's expectations. When he heard the news in the palace, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. He stood there motionless for a long time. Crown Prince, are you all right, Your Highness?" Several young civil and military officials walked up to Li Yuanlong with anxious and concerned expressions on their faces. There were also some older ministers who shook their heads and quickly ran towards the depths of the palace. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who was shaken, finally recovered after a few breaths. The first thing he said was, fight back. We must take back the East Gate Tower and chase those mercenaries out of Hanoi City. Crown Prince, don't worry. Someone is already doing that. Not only that, we are also preparing to send the 10 iron carriages that we just built. General Li Xiaozhong comforted him. He was also preparing to go to the front lines to see if they could take back the East Gate. Good. Hearing Li Xiaozhong's arrangement, Li Yuanlong's expression became much better. His nervous mood seemed to have been relieved. Just as he was thinking about what to do next, footsteps suddenly came from the depths of the palace behind him. Then, a male duck's voice sounded, "The king has arrived." "Greetings, Your Majesty." All the officials, including Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, immediately knelt on the ground. "Oof." What answered them was a cold and unhappy voice. Then, King Lili was helped to sit on the golden chair in the palace hall. Lili was indeed very old. In history, he should have been dead by now. But because of Yang Qindong's arrival, he was still alive. Apart from looking a little older, he was still in good spirits. At least, his face was glowing much better than those officials who had been affected by the chaos and whose faces had turned pale. Sitting on the golden throne, Li Li's gaze was like a tiger king inspecting his territory. First, he looked around. Many officials and generals who were stared at by him couldn't help but lower their heads. Seemingly satisfied with the result, Li Li looked at Li Yuanlong again and shook his head. "Crown Prince, why do you only want to fight them head-on? Could it be that you think that the other party would retreat after killing their way through the city gates? You've really disappointed Father. This child is slow-witted. Father, please enlighten me." Li Yuanlong really didn't know what to say. The situation was messed up by him, and he indeed had an unavoidable responsibility. This was a heavy blow to his prestige as the crown prince. In the past, because Li Yuanlong was calm and generous, he had united many important officials and generals. Sometimes, King Lili had to worry about his feelings when giving orders. There were even some who said in private that the king was getting old and should consider abdicating the throne. The Jiaoji kingdom only had a young king to lead it to glory. These voices were the loudest in Jiuzhen Prefecture, where the crown prince was. After all, the crown prince was there. Some local officials thought that the king was far away, and very few people cared about the old king Li Li. If this continued, it would not be good for the Jiaoji kingdom. It was even possible that there would be an all-out war. King Li Li had his own information network, so he naturally knew a lot about this. He didn't want to give up the throne while he was still alive, nor did he want to see father and son turn against each other. In order to divert everyone's attention, the king of Min's envoy arrived, and he agreed to send troops to the South Ming kingdom. However, he didn't think that the king of Min would be so snobbish and throw them aside as soon as he gained power. As for the Southern Ming Empire, all he wanted was a marriage alliance with a princess to express his goodwill. At the same time, he wanted to strengthen his authority in the Jiaoji Empire. To think that the mercenaries would come all the way here and create such a chaotic situation. If the crown prince could do it, it would be because the king had a good eye for talent. If it didn't work, it would be because he had suppressed the crown prince's arrogance. Thus, Lili had been watching coldly from the sidelines and didn't have any intention of making a move. Now that a hole had been opened in the capital, it was time for him to take charge of the situation and turn the tide. As soon as he appeared, he first reprimanded Li Yuanlong, strongly suppressing the crown prince's arrogance. When this hand was shown, those who originally wanted to flatter the crown prince's smelly feet had to think deeply. The old king was still alive. Should they restrain themselves? Just as some officials were considering their stance, King Li's voice sounded again. However, there was a sense of desolation in his voice. Since they have already entered the city, we should leave. Pass down the order. The East Gate will continue to resist, but it doesn't need to be too intense. We just need to delay their advance. As for the others, withdraw from Hanei City and head to Shiyu City. General Fan Yuhai is already waiting for us there with a large group of warriors. What? As soon as the voice fell, everyone looked up with a puzzled expression. Although it was true that the mercenaries had taken down the East Gate for the Jiaoji Kingdom's capital, Hanei City, they still had the power to resist. In many people's eyes, if they were willing to pay a large price, it was not impossible to counterattack and take back the city gate. But why did they have to withdraw? What they didn't expect was that the king seemed to have known that things would develop like this and actually arranged a large number of soldiers in Shiyu City. They were still wondering why they couldn't see Fan Yuhai just now. It turned out that he had another important task. Many people couldn't figure it out, and their eyes fell on the crown prince Li Yuanlong, who was also kneeling on the ground. Obviously, they wanted the crown prince to stand up and question the king. Being looked at by so many expectant eyes, Li Yuanlong really wanted to stand up and say something. While he was thinking about what to say, King Li on the golden throne spoke first. That's right. I just received news that most of the Jiaojin County has been captured by the mercenaries. I'm afraid that the southern Sun County will be in danger. Plop. This was the sound of the crown prince wanting to stand up, but before he could do so, he fell to the ground. The Jiaojin County is the crown prince's headquarters and foundation. In the past few years, he had properly arranged all the officials there. It can be said that his orders there were far more effective than his father's. This was also what Li Yuanlong relied on. He just wanted to say that he would arrange for the Jiaojin County to send troops to save Hanei City. But now, the East Gate has been captured. This result was like a bolt from the blue that hit him so hard that he fell to the ground. At this moment, the only essence in his body seemed to have been sucked dry. The crown prince's performance fell into the eyes of some people. They quickly made a choice, and that was to continue supporting King Li. Look, the older the ginger, the spicier it is. With just a few words, the crown prince's reputation fell to the lowest point. It seems that he won't be able to recover in a few years. Even the crown prince didn't oppose it. So how could the other officials dare to question it? Besides, since the Jiaojin County has been captured, it means that the mercenaries are serious. If this is the case, then Hanei City really can't be protected. It's better take a step back and retreat to Shiyu City. Some people even think that even if they retreat to Shiyu City, it might not be the end. Fortunately, the king also said that General Fan Yuhai, who was supposed to deploy troops under the crown prince's orders, had already gone to Shiyu City. Moreover, he had already gathered a lot of troops there under the king's orders. This made some people feel more at ease. With the appearance of the king, the officials who didn't know what to do quickly went to make arrangements. After all, their family business was in Hanei City. Now that they suddenly wanted to leave, it would be very troublesome to pack up. It would take at least 3 to 5 days. King Li seemed to have noticed this problem. He waved his hand and said, "Remember, you only have 2 days. From now on, some things will be transported to Shiyu City. After 2 days, if anyone is still in the city, they will have to face the ferocious mercenaries alone. 2 days, in the hands of the great Ming's Baiming and Southern Ming officials, there was definitely not enough time. Over the years, they had bought too many things, so naturally, there were many things that needed to be taken care of. However, Jiaoji was only a small country. Whether it was the economy or agriculture, it wasn't very developed. Even if the officials wanted to fish, there was a limit to what they could get. If they used the 2 days, they would be able to take care of most of it. King Li gave the order to retreat. At the East Gate, Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin was completely unaware of this. He was currently organizing people to guard the gate tower. Before the battle, Kong Chuanxin had discussed with his subordinates. It wasn't a big problem to take down Hanei City's east gate by surprise. The key was whether or not they could defend it. After all, there were tens of thousands of Jiaoji soldiers in the city. Moreover, as long as they were organized properly, the Jiaoji citizens in the city could quickly form an army. If they really attacked like a wave, they would eventually run out of bullets. It was hard to say whether or not the 3,000 mercenaries would be able to defend the East Gate. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.